The stagecoach was 3 days late, and Rowan Mercer had already decided he didn't care. He stood on the sagging porch of his ranch house, arms crossed, watching the horizon where the road from town dissolved into scrub brush and red dirt. The wind tasted like rain and dust, that particular Texas combination that meant a storm was building somewhere beyond sight. His hired hands had scattered to secure the barn and check the fence lines. The cattle were restless, their low bellowing carrying across the pasture like a warning. Rowan didn't need warnings. He'd built this ranch on the principle that disappointment was just another form of weather, inevitable, predictable, and best endured in silence. The housekeeper he'd hired through a newspaper advertisement was supposed to arrive last Tuesday. When Tuesday came and went without any sign of her, he'd shrugged and went back to cooking his own terrible meals. When Wednesday passed, then Thursday, he figured she'd taken one look at the remote location and changed her mind. Couldn't blame her. The ranch sat 20 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a road that turned into a mud trap every time it rained. The house itself was functional, but grim. 2 stories of weathered wood that creaked in the wind, surrounded by nothing but open country and sky. It was exactly the kind of place sensible people avoided, which was exactly why Rowan had chosen it. He turned to go inside when he caught movement on the southern road, a dark shape emerging from the heat shimmer, resolving slowly into the familiar outline of the town stagecoach. It lurched and swayed over the rutted path, drawn by horses that looked as exhausted as Rowan felt. "Well," he muttered to himself, "guess she didn't quit after all." He waited on the porch, making no move to walk down and greet the coach. Let her come to him. Let her see exactly what she'd signed up for before she had any romantic notions about frontier life. The ranch hands called him cold, and they weren't wrong. Rowan had learned a long time ago that warmth was a luxury he couldn't afford. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in the yard, mud-splattered and listing slightly to one side. The driver, old Pete Holloway, who'd been running this route since before the war, climbed down with a grunt and spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Got your delivery, Mercer," Pete called out, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Though I gotta say, this ain't exactly what I expected to be hauling." Rowan's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Pete just shook his head and moved to open the coach door. "See for yourself?" The door swung open and Rowan's entire world tilted sideways. The woman who stepped out wasn't old or matronly or any of the things he'd expected from someone answering an advertisement for a housekeeper position in the middle of nowhere. She was young, maybe 25, maybe 30, hard to tell under the layer of road dust coating her dark hair and plain wool dress. But it wasn't her age that stopped Rowan cold. It was the 2 little girls clinging to her skirts like drowning sailors to driftwood. The older one couldn't have been more than 8. She had sharp eyes that swept the ranch with a calculating wariness Rowan recognized from his own mirror. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her dark hair hung in a braid that had come half undone during the journey. The younger child was maybe 5, small and pale, with enormous eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She pressed herself against the woman's side, trembling visibly despite the warm afternoon. Rowan's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle he'd left leaning against the porch railing. Not threatening, just ready. Old habits. "You're not Mrs. Patterson," he said flatly. The woman met his gaze without flinching. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate miles. But her spine was straight, her chin lifted in defiance of whatever judgment she expected to find here. "No," she said. Her voice was steadier than he'd anticipated. "I'm Eliza Vale, Mrs. Patterson. She took ill the day before the coach was scheduled to leave. I took her place." "Did you?" It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. Instead, she shifted slightly, positioning herself between Rowan and the children in a movement so subtle he almost missed it. Protecting them. From him. Something cold settled in Rowan's chest. He'd seen that kind of protective instinct before, usually in mothers defending their young. But this woman wasn't old enough to have an 8-year-old daughter, which meant, "These girls," he said, gesturing toward them with his chin. "They part of the arrangement?" "They're in my care," Eliza said. Not an answer, not really. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The younger girl whimpered and buried her face in Eliza's skirt. The older one just kept staring at Rowan with those unnervingly adult eyes. Pete cleared his throat. "Look, Mercer, I already got paid for the trip, so that's done. But if you're not keeping them, I need to know now. Storm's coming, and I ain't getting caught on that road in a downpour." Rowan dragged his gaze away from Eliza and the children. His mind was racing through calculations, weighing risks against needs. He'd advertised for one housekeeper, one quiet, middle-aged woman who'd cook his meals and clean his house, and not ask questions about why a man would choose to live this far from civilization. Instead, he had 3 strangers standing in his yard, 3 mouths to feed, 3 lives to be responsible for, 3 potential disasters waiting to unfold. He should send them back. Right now, before whatever trouble they were running from landed on his doorstep. The smart move was obvious, but Rowan Mercer had stopped making smart moves the day he'd walked away from the war with nothing but scars and survival instincts. And something about the way Eliza stood there, exhausted but unbroken, protecting those girls like they were the only thing in the world worth fighting for, stirred something he'd thought was long dead. 2 weeks, he heard himself say. You got 2 weeks to prove you can handle the work. Girls, stay quiet and out of the way. After that, we'll see. Eliza's shoulders dropped half an inch in relief. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. You won't regret— I already regret it, Rowan cut her off. Pete, help them with their bags. I'm not running a charity here. He turned and walked back into the house before he could change his mind, letting the screen door slam behind him. Through the window, he watched Pete unload a single battered trunk and 2 small bundles tied with string. Everything these 3 owned, apparently, fit into less space than a hay bale. Running. They were definitely running. The question was from what? The house had been silent for so long that the sound of footsteps on the stairs felt like an invasion. Rowan sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee forgotten in front of him, listening to the floorboards creak overhead as Eliza and the girls explored their new quarters. He'd given them the 2 spare bedrooms on the 2nd floor, rooms that had been gathering dust since he'd moved here 4 years ago. The furniture was basic: beds, washstands, a single dresser in each room, nothing fancy, nothing comfortable, just functional, like everything else in his life. The older girl appeared in the doorway first, moving with the kind of careful silence that came from living in places where noise meant trouble. She looked at Rowan, then at the empty chair across from him, calculating whether she was allowed to sit. Your name's Clara, right? Rowan said. That's what the woman called you. Yes, sir. Her voice was quiet but clear. No trembling, no fear, just watchfulness. You eat meat? Clara blinked, thrown by the question. Yes, sir. Milk? Eggs? Yes, sir. Your sister too? Ivy don't like eggs much, sir. Makes her stomach hurt sometimes. Rowan filed that information away. Noted. There's bread in the box and butter in the cold cellar. You're hungry now. Take what you need. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late. Clara nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Mercer? What? Thank you for letting us stay. She was gone before he could respond, her footsteps quick and light on the stairs. Rowan sat in the silence she left behind, feeling something uncomfortable twist in his chest. The kid had manners, probably more than he did. He heard Eliza's voice upstairs, soft and reassuring, talking to the younger one, Ivy. The words were too muffled to make out, but the tone was gentle, maternal, the kind of voice that belonged to mothers tucking their children into bed, promising everything would be all right, even when it wouldn't. Rowan pushed back from the table and walked to the window. The storm was closer now, dark clouds rolling across the sky like an invasion force. The wind had picked up, bending the grass in silver waves. His cattle were bunched together in the far pasture, nervous but secure. The barn was locked down. Everything was ready, except him. He wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready for the way Clara's quiet thank you had hit him like a fist to the chest, wasn't ready for the sound of life returning to a house he'd deliberately kept empty, wasn't ready for Eliza Vale and whatever secrets she was carrying. But ready or not, they were here now. And Rowan Mercer had never walked away from a fight in his life. Dinner that first night was an awkward, silent affair. Rowan had cooked beans and salt pork, biscuits that came out harder than they should have, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He set the food on the table without ceremony and sat down, expecting the others to follow his lead. Eliza appeared with both girls in tow, their faces scrubbed clean, their hair damp from washing. She'd changed into a different dress, Still plain but cleaner than the travel-stained one she'd arrived in. The girls wore simple cotton shifts that had been mended multiple times, patches layered over patches. They sat in perfect silence, waiting. It took Rowan a full 10 seconds to realize they were waiting for permission. "Eat," he said gruffly. Clara served Ivy first, careful portions placed on the child's plate, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Only then did she serve herself. Eliza took last, her portions smaller than the girls. They ate without speaking. The only sounds were the scrape of forks against plates and the rising wind outside. Rowan watched them from the corner of his eye, noting details. The way Clara cut Ivy's pork into smaller pieces without being asked. The way Eliza's hand shook slightly when she reached for her water glass, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that they'd stopped moving. The way Ivy kept glancing toward the window every time thunder rumbled, her small body tensing like she expected something terrible to come crashing through. "Storm won't hurt you," Rowan said. "House has stood through worse." Ivy's eyes went wide, and she looked down at her plate, shrinking into herself. Rowan cursed internally. Wrong approach. He'd spent too many years talking to ranch hands and cattle. Didn't know how to gentle his voice for scared children. "Ivy's afraid of storms," Clara said quietly. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. "Ever since—" "Clara," Eliza interrupted softly. "Eat your dinner." The older girl fell silent, but her eyes met Rowan's across the table. And that look was a whole conversation. Ever since something happened, something bad, something we don't talk about. Rowan nodded once, an acknowledgement, and returned to his food. If they wanted to keep their secrets, that was fine. He had plenty of his own. The rain started halfway through the meal, a sudden deluge that hammered against the windows and drummed on the roof. Ivy dropped her fork with a clatter and pressed both hands over her ears, eyes squeezed shut. Her whole body shook. Eliza moved immediately, pulling the child into her lap and wrapping both arms around her. "Shh, sweetheart. You're safe. I've got you." "Make it stop," Ivy whimpered. "Please make it stop." "I can't stop the rain, baby, but I can hold you until it passes. Just breathe with me. In and out. That's right." Clara had gone very still, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, watching her sister with an expression that was equal parts concern and resignation. This had happened before. Many times before. Rowan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Both Eliza and Clara tensed, readying themselves for anger or demands to keep the noise down. Instead, he walked to the front room and returned with a thick wool blanket. "Here," he said, holding it out to Eliza. "Muffles the sound some." Eliza stared at him for a moment, something unreadable crossing her face. Then she took the blanket and wrapped it around Ivy, creating a cocoon that dampened the noise of the storm. The child's shaking gradually subsided, her breathing evening out. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. Rowan grunted and sat back down. "Finish your food before it gets cold." They sat in that strange tableau, a stranger family gathered around a table in a house that had known only loneliness for years, while outside the storm raged and the frontier night pressed close against the windows. And for the first time since he'd come to this God-forsaken ranch, Rowan Mercer felt something other than emptiness. He felt responsible. Why? The morning after the storm dawned clear and merciless, the sun burning away any trace of the previous night's rain. Rowan was up before first light, as always, moving through his routine with the mechanical precision of long practice. Feed the horses, check the cattle, inspect the fence lines for damage. The work never stopped, never varied, never asked him to be anything other than capable. He was examining a section of fence that had sagged during the storm when he heard footsteps approaching. Light, quick, deliberate. He turned to find Clara standing a few feet away, wearing a dress that was too short for her and boots that had seen better days. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Miss Eliza says I'm to ask if there's anything you need help with this morning." Rowan straightened, studying her. The kid couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds soaking wet, and ranch work was brutal even for grown men. "You ever worked around livestock?" "Some, sir. She stopped, correcting herself. "Where we lived before, there was a farm. I helped with the chickens mostly. Fed 'em, collected eggs, cleaned the coop." "Chickens," Rowan repeated. "Well, I don't keep chickens. Got cattle, horses, and not much else." Clara's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll go back and help Miss Eliza then. She turned to leave, and Rowan heard himself say, "Hold on." The girl stopped, looking back over her shoulder. "You scared of horses?" "No, sir." "Come on, then." He led her to the barn where his 4 working horses were stalled. They were good animals, solid, dependable, used to hard work and rough handling. When Clara appeared in the doorway, the nearest horse, a bay mare named Copper, lifted her head and nickered softly. Clara's entire face transformed. The wariness melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like joy. She walked straight to Copper's stall without hesitation, holding out her hand for the mare to sniff. "Hey there, beautiful," she murmured. "Aren't you something?" Copper nuzzled Clara's palm, and the girl laughed. An actual laugh, bright and genuine and completely unexpected. Rowan found himself staring, caught off guard by the sound. "You got away with them," he said. Clara glanced at him, suddenly self-conscious again. "My moth—" Again that hesitation. "Someone taught me. Said animals can tell when you're scared or lying, so you gotta be honest with them." Smart advice. Rowan grabbed a brush from the tack wall and handed it to her. "Think you can handle grooming? Not too rough. Work with the grain of the coat. Copper here's patient, but she don't like her legs messed with until she knows you better." "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Then get to it. I'll be working on the fence. You run into trouble, holler." He left her there, fully expecting to come back and find the job half done or the girl scared off by Copper's size. Instead, when he returned an hour later, Copper's coat was gleaming, her mane neatly combed, and Clara was moving on to the second horse with steady, competent hands. The kid knew what she was doing. More than that, she loved it. He could see it in the careful way she worked, the soft words she murmured to each animal, the small smile that had replaced her usual guarded expression. "Who taught you this?" Rowan asked. Clara's hand stilled on the brush. "My mama, before she died." "She a farm woman?" "No, sir. She was a housemaid. Worked for a family that kept horses. Sometimes they'd let her bring me to the stables." Clara's voice went quiet. "That was a long time ago." Rowan nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle starting to form a picture he didn't like. Housemaid. Dead mother. 2 girls traveling with a woman who wasn't their mother, but called them her responsibility. A woman running from something. "Eliza," he said. "She kin to you?" Clara's head snapped up, eyes wide and frightened. "Please, Mr. Mercer, don't ask me that, please." The fear in her voice was so raw, so genuine, that Rowan raised both hands in surrender. "All right, none of my business." "We won't make trouble," Clara said urgently. "I promise. Ivy and me, we'll be quiet. We'll work hard. Miss Eliza, she's good. She's real good. She's trying to keep us safe." "Safe from what?" Clara looked down at her boots. "People who don't understand that families ain't always about blood." With that cryptic statement, she went back to brushing the horse, signaling that the conversation was over. Rowan let it drop, but his mind was working through implications. Not blood relatives. Running. Desperate enough to take a job in the middle of nowhere without asking questions. Whatever Eliza Vale was protecting these girls from, it was bad enough that they'd risk everything on a stranger's ranch. And despite every survival instinct screaming at him to send them away before their problems became his problems, Rowan found himself walking back to the house thinking about breakfast and whether they had enough eggs for everyone. By the end of the first week, a strange rhythm had established itself. Eliza worked from dawn until dark, attacking the house with a determination that bordered on fury. She scrubbed floors Rowan hadn't realized were dirty, washed windows that hadn't been cleaned in years, organized the kitchen with brutal efficiency. The meals improved dramatically, real bread instead of hardtack, vegetables from the town market she'd somehow convinced one of the ranch hands to pick up on his supply run, stews that actually had flavor. The house, which had been little more than a shelter, started feeling like a home. Rowan wasn't sure how he felt about that. Clara spent her mornings helping Eliza and her afternoons in the barn, gradually working her way into the ranch hand's good graces with her steady competence around the animals. Even old Tom Wickham, who'd been running cattle since before the war and didn't have a kind word for anybody, admitted the kid had natural instincts. Ivy remained the most fragile piece of their unlikely household. She rarely spoke, especially to Rowan, and spent most of her time following Eliza like a shadow. But slowly, very slowly, color was returning to her cheeks. The desperate, hunted look in her eyes was fading, replaced by something that might eventually become peace. Rowan told himself he was just being practical. The work was getting done. The house was running smoothly. It made sense to let them stay beyond the initial 2 weeks. But the truth sat heavier in his chest every night when he heard footsteps upstairs and voices murmuring bedtime prayers. The truth was, he'd gotten used to them. To Clara's serious questions about cattle breeding, to the smell of fresh bread in the morning, to the way Ivy had started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen table in a chipped cup, offerings of beauty in a place that had known only function, to the way Eliza sometimes stood at the window at dusk, staring out at the empty horizon with an expression that said she was waiting for something terrible to arrive. It was Tuesday evening when that terrible thing finally appeared. Rowan was on the porch, reviewing the supply list for the following week, when he saw riders approaching from the east. 3 of them, moving fast, dust rising in their wake. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle he now kept within arm's reach, a habit from his war days he'd never quite shaken. The front door opened and Eliza stepped out. One look at the riders and all the color drained from her face. "Rowan," she whispered. First time she'd used his name. "I need you to trust me."
"Who are they?" "The one in front is my father's lawyer. The man who—" Her voice cracked. "Please, don't let them take the girls." Before Rowan could respond, Clara and Ivy appeared in the doorway. Clara took one look at the approaching riders and immediately pushed Ivy behind her, taking up a protective stance that was achingly familiar. "Inside," Eliza ordered. "Both of you. Upstairs. Don't come down no matter what you hear." "But Miss Eliza," Clara started. "Now." The girls vanished back into the house. Rowan heard their footsteps pounding up the stairs, too loud in the sudden stillness. He looked at Eliza, at the terror and determination warring in her eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. "Tell me fast," he said. "What are they here for?" "The girls," Eliza said. "They want custody. They believe they can give Clara and Ivy a better life, education, society, everything I can't provide." "And what do you think?" "I think they'll separate them, send them to different families. I think Ivy won't survive it." Her hands were shaking. "I think Clara will grow up being told she's worth less because of who her mother was. I think they'll have their better life and lose everything that matters." The riders were close now. Close enough that Rowan could make out details. The lawyer in front was exactly what you'd expect. Well-dressed, city-soft, with a face that had never known a hard day's work. The 2 men with him were hired muscle, and not the subtle kind. "How much time did you think you had?" Rowan asked. "I didn't think," Eliza admitted. "I just ran. It was stupid and reckless, and now—" "Now they found you." Rowan stepped forward, positioning himself between Eliza and the approaching riders. "All right, let's see what they want." The 3 men reined up in the yard, their horses blowing hard from the ride. The lawyer dismounted with the careful movements of someone unused to saddle work. Up close, he looked even more out of place. Expensive suit, polished boots, silver-handled walking stick that was pure affectation. "Good evening," the lawyer said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm looking for a Miss Eliza Vale. I was told she might be residing here." "Who's asking?" Rowan kept his voice level, neutral. "Arthur Pemberton, attorney at law. I represent the estate of the late Mr. Jonathan Ashcroft." Pemberton's eyes flicked to Eliza, recognition lighting his features. "Ah, Miss Vale, how fortuitous. This will make matters much simpler." "I got nothing to say to you," Eliza said, her voice hard despite the fear bleeding through. "You got no claim here." "Actually, Miss Vale, I have every claim. The 2 minor children currently in your unlawful custody are wards of the Ashcroft estate. As Mr. Ashcroft's illegitimate daughter, you have no legal standing to—" "Those girls are my sisters," Eliza cut him off. "I've been caring for them since our parents died. I ain't giving them up to strangers." Pemberton's smile was pitying and cruel in equal measure. "Your emotional attachment is noted, but irrelevant. Mr. Ashcroft's will makes no provision for illegitimate offspring. The children, Claire and Ivy, I believe, are to be placed with Mrs. Genevieve Ashcroft, their late father's cousin, who can provide them with proper education, social standing, and moral guidance." "Genevieve Ashcroft don't care about those girls," Eliza said, desperation creeping into her voice. "She wants control of their inheritance. That's all this is." What you believe and what the law recognizes are two different matters. Pemberton pulled a folded document from his jacket. I have a court order granting temporary custody to Mrs. Ashcroft pending a full hearing. The children are to be surrendered immediately. No, the word came from Rowan, flat and final. Pemberton turned to him with raised eyebrows. I beg your pardon? You heard me. No. Rowan crossed his arms. You got a piece of paper says you can take children from their home? Well, this is private property and you're trespassing, so I suggest you get back on that horse and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Pemberton's expression hardened. Mr. Mercer, Rowan Mercer, this is my land. Mr. Mercer, I understand you may have developed some misplaced sympathy for Miss Vale's situation, but interfering with a legal custody order is a criminal offense. I strongly advise you to Don't care what you advise. Rowan's hand drifted toward the rifle. Not threatening, just reminding. Girls, stay here. One of Pemberton's hired men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Rowan's ranch hands had started drifting in from the various corners of the property, drawn by the commotion. Tom Wickham leaned against the barn door, cleaning his rifle with pointed concentration. Two more hands appeared on the far side of the yard, armed and watching. The odds had just shifted considerably. Pemberton looked around, reassessing. His smile returned, but it had lost some of its confidence. Very well, I can see this matter won't be resolved through civilized conversation. But understand, Mr. Mercer, this is not over. Mrs. Ashcroft is a determined woman with considerable resources. She will have those children, one way or another. She can try. She will do more than try. And when she does, I hope you've considered the consequences. For yourself, for your ranch, for Miss Vale. Pemberton's gaze shifted back to Eliza. You can't run forever. And dragging these good people into your mess, well, that's just selfish, isn't it? Eliza flinched like he'd struck her. Rowan saw her start to crumble, saw her thinking maybe Pemberton was right. Maybe she should just surrender to save everyone else the trouble. Get off my land, Rowan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Now! Pemberton mounted his horse with as much dignity as he could manage, which wasn't much. You'll be hearing from us, Mr. Mercer, very soon. They rode off, disappearing back into the dust and heat shimmer. Rowan waited until they were completely out of sight before lowering his hand from the rifle. Behind him, he heard Eliza release a breath she'd been holding. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. You shouldn't have. They'll come back. With more men. Maybe the law. They'll take this ranch apart piece by piece until they find what they want. Let them try. Rowan turned to face her. But first, you're going to tell me the whole truth. No more dancing around it. I just made enemies of people who sound like they got money and connections, and I deserve to know exactly what I'm fighting. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes. Then she nodded. All right, she said. You want the truth? Here it is. And standing there in the fading light while his ranch hands pretended not to listen and the girls huddled somewhere upstairs, Eliza Vale finally told Rowan Mercer the story that had brought 3 desperate souls to his doorstep. It was worse than he'd imagined, and it changed absolutely everything. The kitchen felt smaller with all of them crowded around the table. Eliza sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring at the dark liquid like it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. Clara and Ivy were upstairs. Rowan had heard their footsteps pacing back and forth across the floorboards, restless and frightened. Tom Wickham stood by the door, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. The other ranch hands had dispersed back to their work, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Rowan waited. He'd learned patience in the war, learned that sometimes silence extracted truth better than questions ever could. Eliza would talk when she was ready, and pushing her would only make her defensive. Finally, she set down the cup and looked at him directly. Jonathan Ashcroft was my father, she said. Not that he ever claimed me. My mother was a housemaid in his Boston estate. Pretty girl, young, probably foolish enough to believe a rich man when he said he loved her. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reciting someone else's story. When she got pregnant, he gave her money and sent her away. Told her if she ever came back or tried to contact him, he'd make sure she never worked again. Bastard, Tom muttered from the doorway. Eliza's mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. My mother raised me on her own. We moved around a lot. Boston, New York, Philadelphia. She worked whatever job she could find, sewing, cleaning, laundry. I helped when I was old enough. It wasn't much of a life, but it was ours. She ever try to get money from him? Rowan asked. The father? Never. She had her pride, even when we were starving, said she didn't want anything from a man who couldn't own up to his own blood. Eliza's fingers tightened around the cup. She died when I was 17. Fever took her in 3 days. I buried her in a pauper's grave because I couldn't afford anything better. The kitchen was silent except for the tick of the clock on the mantel. Rowan thought about his own mother, buried proper with a headstone and flowers. The luxury of grief with dignity. He'd never appreciated it before. After she died, I didn't know what to do, Eliza continued. I had no family, no money, no prospects. I was about to end up on the streets when I got a letter from Jonathan Ashcroft's attorney. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Apparently the old bastard had developed a conscience on his deathbed, left a sealed letter confessing I was his daughter. Didn't leave me any money. That all went to his legitimate children from his marriage. But the letter existed, which meant I existed, legally. How'd you find out about Clara and Ivy? Rowan asked. The attorney told me, said Ashcroft had remarried late in life to a woman 20 years younger. She gave him 2 daughters, Clara and Ivy. Then last year, both parents died. Fever again. Seems to run in the family. Eliza's voice cracked slightly. The girls were left to the care of Ashcroft's cousin, Genevieve. Rich widow, no children of her own, seemed like the natural choice. But, Tom prompted. But I couldn't stop thinking about them. My sisters, half-sisters, anyway. Girls who'd lost their parents just like I had, only they were so much younger. Clara was barely 7. Ivy was 4. Eliza looked up at Rowan, and he saw the fierceness there, the desperate love that had driven her across half the country. I went to see them, just once. I told myself I just wanted to know they were all right. They weren't, Rowan said. It wasn't a question. Genevieve kept them locked in the nursery most of the day, said children should be seen and not heard, and preferably not seen either. Clara she was so small, but she had these old eyes, like she'd already learned the world was cruel and there was no point fighting it. And Ivy? Eliza's voice broke completely. Ivy barely spoke, just sat in the corner and rocked herself. The servants told me she cried every night for her mother. Genevieve's solution was to have the nursery moved to the far end of the house so she wouldn't have to hear it. Rowan's jaw tightened. He'd seen children broken by war, by poverty, by circumstances beyond their control. It never got easier to witness. I left that house and I couldn't stop thinking about them, Eliza said. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could see was Clara's face and Ivy's empty eyes. So I went back. Told Genevieve I was their half-sister, that I wanted to be part of their lives. She didn't take it well, Tom guessed. She laughed in my face, said I was exactly what she'd expect from Jonathan Ashcroft's bastard, presumptuous and grasping, told me I had no legal rights to the children, and if I showed up again, she'd have me arrested for harassment. Eliza's hands trembled. That should have been the end of it. I should have walked away. But you didn't, Rowan said. No. Because 3 weeks later, I got a letter from Clara. Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from being read too many times. She'd learned to write by watching the governess teach the neighbors' children through the window. It said, "Please come back. Ivy won't stop crying and they're going to send her away to a school for difficult children. Please." She handed the letter to Rowan. The handwriting was childish, uneven, with words misspelled and letters reversed. But the desperation came through clear as a bell. At the bottom, someone had drawn a small flower. Ivy's contribution, probably. A plea in the only language she had. So I went back, Eliza said. Middle of the night. Found a servant who felt sorry for the girls and convinced her to let me in. I packed what little they had and we left. Walked to the train station, bought tickets with the last of my savings, and ran. Just like that, Rowan said. You became a kidnapper. I became their sister, Eliza corrected, eyes flashing. The only family they had who gave a damn whether they lived or died. You didn't see them, Rowan. You didn't see how scared they were, how small. Clara was barely eating. Ivy had started pulling out her own hair. Another month in that house, and she couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan set the letter on the table carefully, like it might break.
How'd they track you here?
I don't know. I was careful. Used different names, paid in cash, avoided big towns. Eliza's shoulders slumped. But Genevieve has money and connections. Of course she found us. I was stupid to think we could just disappear. You weren't stupid, Tom said gruffly. You were desperate. Different thing.
Desperate and stupid often look the same from the outside, Eliza said. She looked at Rowan, and he saw the moment she made her decision. I'll leave, tonight. Take the girls and head west, or maybe south. You've done enough, more than enough. I won't let our trouble destroy what you've built here. Sit down, Rowan said, but
I said, sit down. He waited until she sank back into her chair. You think running will solve this? They found you once. They'll find you again. And next time there might not be someone standing between you and those lawyers. Then what am I supposed to do? Eliza's voice rose, frustration and fear bleeding through. I can't fight them in court. I have no money, no legal standing. Pemberton was right. I'm nobody. An illegitimate daughter with no claim to anything.
You're the only mother those girls have known for the past 6 months, Rowan said. That's got to count for something. Not in the eyes of the law, it doesn't. Eliza pressed her hands against her face. You don't understand how this works. People like Genevieve, they don't just have money, they have power. Judges, politicians, newspapers, they're all in the same circles. She could destroy you just for helping us. Let her try. The conviction in Rowan's voice made Eliza look up. Why are you doing this? You barely know us. We're nothing to you. Rowan thought about that question. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up in years of isolation, the ghosts of war that still woke him some nights, the bone-deep weariness of living a life that had no purpose beyond survival. But there was a simpler truth underneath all that. Clara's got a gift with horses, he said. Saw her calming down my most skittish mare yesterday. Kid's a natural. Be ashamed to waste that in some fancy finishing school. He paused. And Ivy left flowers on the table this morning. First time anything in this house has been there just because it's pretty. Not practical, not necessary, just nice. Eliza stared at him. That's why you're risking everything? Horses and flowers? No. Rowan met her eyes. I'm risking it because I remember what it's like to be a scared kid with nowhere to go, and because if I send you away knowing what's waiting out there, I won't be able to sleep at night. Simple as that. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Tom cleared his throat from the doorway. If we're doing this, we need a plan, he said. Can't just wait around for them to come back with the sheriff and a court order. Need to be smart about it. What are you suggesting? Rowan asked. Well, seems to me the problem is Miss Eliza's got no legal standing. Can't claim the girls as family. Can't prove she's fit to care for them. Tom's weathered face creased in thought. But if she were married to a landowner with a stable home and income, that might change things. The kitchen went dead silent. Eliza's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. Makes sense, Tom said with a shrug. Marriage would give you legal protection. The girls would be part of an established household. Harder for some Boston lawyer to argue they'd be better off elsewhere. That's insane, Eliza said. No one would believe it. A marriage of convenience right when we're being threatened? They'd see through it immediately. Maybe, Tom acknowledged, but it'd buy time. Force them to fight in court instead of just snatching the girls and running, and time might be all we need to build a real case. Rowan sat back in his chair, mind working through the angles. It was reckless, possibly illegal, definitely the kind of thing that could blow up in all their faces. But Tom wasn't wrong about the tactical advantage. A marriage would complicate Genevieve's custody claim considerably. Rowan, you can't seriously be considering this, Eliza said, her voice rising. Marriage it's not something you just do for strategy. It's a life commitment. You'd be tied to me legally, financially. What happens when this is over, when the girls are safe? You'd be stuck with a wife you never wanted. Marriages end, Rowan said flatly. Divorce exists. Not without scandal. Not without damage to your reputation. Eliza shook her head. I won't ask that of you. I won't. You're not asking. I'm offering. Rowan leaned forward. Look, I'm not some romantic fool. I know what this is, a business arrangement that happens to look like a marriage. But it gives you protection, gives the girls stability, and forces Genevieve to fight on our terms instead of hers. That's worth whatever inconvenience comes with it. Inconvenience, Eliza repeated somewhere between laughter and tears. You're talking about marrying a stranger to protect children you've known for barely a week, and you're calling it an inconvenience. What else would you call it? She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I'd call it the craziest thing anyone's ever done for me. Then say yes. Eliza looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Rowan wasn't sure what. Doubt, maybe. Second thoughts. Some sign that he didn't understand what he was offering, but he understood perfectly. He was offering his name, his home, his protection, for two frightened little girls and a woman who'd already proven she'd sacrifice everything for them. He'd made worse decisions in his life. Most of them had worked out poorly. Maybe it was time to try something different. If I say yes, Eliza said slowly, we do this right. No pretending, no lies. The girls need to know this is about keeping them safe, not about anything else. Agreed. And when this is over, when they're safe and Genevieve's backed off, we revisit the arrangement, figure out what comes next. Fair enough? Eliza took a shaky breath. Then yes, I'll marry you. Tom grunted in satisfaction. Good. I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow. See if the preacher can do it quick and quiet. Less people know about this beforehand, the better. What about the girls? Eliza asked. They need to understand what's happening. Tell them the truth, Rowan said, or as much of it as they can handle. Kids are smarter than people give them credit for. Eliza nodded, but she looked shaken. Rowan couldn't blame her. In the span of one evening, she'd gone from housekeeper to fugitive to bride. It was enough to rattle anyone. Get some rest, he told her. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. She stood on unsteady legs. Rowan, thank you. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to say. You're saving our lives. Haven't saved anything yet, Rowan said. Just bought us time to fight. Don't thank me until we've won. After she left, Tom lingered in the doorway. You know this is crazy, right? I'm aware. And you're doing it anyway. Seems that way. Tom shook his head, but there was something approving in his expression. Never thought I'd see the day Rowan Mercer did something purely because it was right, instead of because it was smart. Who says it's not smart? Oh, it's smart tactically, but emotionally? You're walking into a mess that could tear you apart. Tom's eyes were sharp despite his age. Those girls are going to get attached. Hell, they already are. And when this is over, however it ends, someone's going to get hurt. Yeah, Rowan said quietly. Probably me. You willing to risk that? Rowan thought about Clara's careful smile when the horses nuzzled her hand, about Ivy's flowers on the table, about Eliza's fierce determination to protect the only family she had left, even when the whole world told her she had no right. Yeah, he said. I am. Tom nodded slowly. Then I'll go tell the boys to keep their rifles handy. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of those lawyers. He left Rowan alone in the kitchen with cold coffee and the weight of a decision that would change everything. Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Peaceful. Deceptive. Rowan had learned in the war that the quietest nights often came right before the worst battles. He had a feeling this one wouldn't be any different. The wedding happened 3 days later in the front room of the ranch house, with the preacher looking uncomfortable and the ranch hands standing witness with varying degrees of bemusement. Clara and Ivy sat on the stairs in their best dresses, which weren't much, but Eliza had spent 2 days washing and mending them until they looked presentable. Rowan wore his only good shirt and the boots he reserved for town. Eliza had borrowed a dress from the general store owner's wife, pale blue cotton that had seen better days but fit well enough. Her hand shook as she held a small bouquet of wildflowers Ivy had picked that morning. We are gathered here, the preacher began, his voice uncertain, like he couldn't quite believe what he was being asked to do. Reverend Matthews was a circuit preacher who passed through once a month, and Rowan suspected Tom had paid him extra to not ask too many questions about the sudden ceremony. The vows were simple, traditional. Rowan listened to himself promise to love, honor, and cherish, and wondered if he'd ever be capable of any of those things. He'd loved once, a lifetime ago, and it had ended badly. Honor he understood. That was just keeping your word. But cherish? That was something for poets and romantic fools. Still, he said the words. And when it came time to slip the ring onto Eliza's finger, His mother's ring, the only piece of jewelry he'd kept, his hands were steady. Hers weren't. The ring was too big, spinning loose on her thin finger, but she curled her hand into a fist to keep it from falling off. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said, relief evident in his voice. "You may kiss the bride." Rowan hesitated. They discussed the ceremony, but not this part. Eliza met his eyes, a question in hers. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. The kiss was brief, chaste, nothing more than a brush of lips that tasted like fear and desperation and something that might have been hope. When he pulled back, Ivy was clapping from the stairs, delighted by the ceremony, even if she didn't fully understand it. Clara watched with those old, knowing eyes, and Rowan suspected she understood more than any of them wanted to admit. "Congratulations," Tom said gruffly, shaking Rowan's hand, "though I still think you're both insane." "Probably," Rowan agreed. The other hands offered their own awkward congratulations, then quickly dispersed back to work. The preacher accepted his payment and left even faster, clearly eager to be away from whatever strange drama he'd just witnessed. Within an hour, it was just the four of them again. Rowan, Eliza, Clara, and Ivy. A family that had been cobbled together from desperation and legal maneuvering. "So," Eliza said, still holding her wilting bouquet, "what happens now?" "Now we wait," Rowan said. "Pemberton's going to hear about this marriage within the week. When he does, he'll come back. With more lawyers, probably a judge. We need to be ready." "How do we get ready for that?" Clara asked from the stairs. She'd been quiet during the ceremony, but now her voice was sharp with worry. "They got the law on their side." "Maybe, but we've got truth on ours." Rowan looked at the girl seriously. "When they come, they're going to ask you and Ivy questions about where you want to live, who you want to live with. You need to be honest. Don't tell them what you think they want to hear. Tell them what's true." "That we want to stay here," Clara said immediately, "with Miss Eliza and you." Something in Rowan's chest tightened. "Yeah, that." Ivy climbed down from the stairs and walked over to Eliza, taking her hand. "Are you really married now?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Does that make Mr. Mercer our papa?" The room went very still. Eliza looked at Rowan, panic in her eyes, clearly not knowing how to answer that question without overstepping. Rowan crouched down until he was eye level with Ivy. "I'm not your papa," he said gently. "Your papa died, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm family now, if you want me to be." Ivy considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. "Can family people read stories?" "I suppose so." "Then can you read to me tonight?" Miss Eliza's voice gets tired. Rowan glanced up at Eliza, who looked like she might cry. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." Ivy beamed, satisfied with this arrangement, and ran back upstairs to play. Clara lingered a moment longer. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for doing this. I know it ain't real, but thank you anyway." She followed her sister upstairs before Rowan could figure out how to respond, which left him alone with Eliza in the front room where they'd just gotten married, surrounded by the aftermath of a ceremony that was supposed to solve their problems and had instead created a whole new set of complications. "I'm sorry," Eliza said. "About Ivy. She doesn't understand that this is just—" "Don't," Rowan interrupted. "Don't apologize for her wanting a family. There's worse things a kid could want." "I know, but she's going to get attached. They both are. And when this ends—" Eliza's voice trailed off. "When this ends, we'll figure it out, one problem at a time." Rowan straightened, his knees protesting. "For now, we focus on keeping you all safe. Everything else can wait." Eliza nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "Where will I sleep tonight?" The question caught Rowan off guard. He hadn't thought that far ahead. "The girls are in the spare rooms upstairs. My room's at the end of the hall. You can take it. I'll sleep down here." "I can't take your room, Eliza." He cut her off with a look. "We're supposed to be married. Married people share a house. If anyone comes snooping, it needs to look legitimate. Take the room. I'll be fine on the couch." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But Rowan, this arrangement, it's temporary. Once the girls are safe, once Genevieve backs off, we'll end it. Go our separate ways. I won't hold you to vows you made under duress."
They weren't under duress, Rowan said. I knew exactly what I was doing. Did you? Because I'm not sure I did. Eliza twisted his mother's ring on her finger. This morning, I was a housekeeper. Tonight, I'm your wife. In 3 days, I went from running for my life to being legally protected by a marriage I never expected. It doesn't feel real. It's real enough, Rowan said. The preacher signed the papers. The hands witnessed it. In the eyes of the law, we're married. Whether it feels real or not doesn't change that. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. You're a strange man, Rowan Mercer. I've been called worse. I didn't mean it as an insult. Just, most men wouldn't do what you did today. Most men would have sent us away the moment Pemberton showed up. I'm not most men. No, Eliza agreed softly. You're really not. She went upstairs, leaving Rowan alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of wildflowers. He poured himself a whiskey, something he rarely did, but today seemed to warrant it, and sat in the chair by the window, watching the sun set over his land, his ranch, his life that he'd carefully constructed to be simple, solitary, and safe. And now he had a wife and 2 children who weren't his but were depending on him anyway. Tom had been right. He was insane. But as he heard footsteps overhead, heard Eliza's soft voice reading to the girls, heard Ivy's delighted laugh at whatever story was being told, Rowan thought maybe insane wasn't the worst thing to be. Maybe it was exactly what this broken-down ranch needed. The next week passed in a strange limbo. Outwardly, nothing changed. The work continued. Cattle needed tending, fences needed mending, supplies needed hauling. But underneath, there was a tension that never quite dissipated, like waiting for a storm that hadn't arrived yet, but everyone knew was coming. Eliza threw herself into the household work with renewed intensity. She organized the pantry, mended clothes that had needed fixing for months, even started a small garden plot behind the house. Keeping busy, Rowan recognized. Avoiding the reality of their situation by focusing on tasks that had clear beginnings and endings. Clara spent her days in the barn or out on the range with Tom, learning everything she could about cattle and horses. The kids soaked up knowledge like a sponge, asking questions that showed she was thinking 3 steps ahead. Tom told Rowan she had better instincts than half the men he'd worked with over the years. Ivy was slowly coming out of her shell. The terror that had kept her silent and shaking was fading, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the world around her. She followed Eliza like a shadow most days, but occasionally she'd venture out on her own to explore the yard or watch the ranch hands work from a safe distance. And every night, Rowan read to her before bed. It had started as a one-time thing, but Ivy had asked the next night, and the night after that, until it became routine. He dug out some old books from a trunk in the attic, things his mother had kept, stories he'd half forgotten. His reading wasn't smooth or particularly expressive, but Ivy didn't seem to care. She just curled up against Eliza's side, thumb in her mouth, and listened until her eyes grew heavy. It felt domestic in a way that made Rowan deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. This was supposed to be strategic, practical, a means to an end. Instead, it was starting to feel like something else entirely. On the 8th day after the wedding, Pemberton returned. This time he brought 6 men, a judge, and Genevieve Ashcroft herself. Rowan saw them coming from a mile away, a cloud of dust on the eastern road that resolved into a small convoy of carriages and riders. He was mending fence with Tom when he spotted them, and something cold settled in his gut. "Time's up," Tom said grimly. "Get the others," Rowan ordered. "Everyone armed but not threatening, just present." Tom rode off while Rowan walked back to the house. Eliza was in the kitchen kneading bread dough, her hands white with flour. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her freeze. "They're here," Rowan said. The color drained from Eliza's face. "Already?" "Coming up the road now. Big group this time. Judge, lawyers, and a woman I'm guessing is Genevieve." He moved to the window, watching the approaching convoy. "Where are the girls?" "Upstairs, Clara's reading to Ivy." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, leaving flour streaks. "Should I hide them?" "No, hiding makes us look guilty. Let them stay upstairs for now, but if the judge wants to talk to them, we don't fight it." Rowan turned to face her. "Remember what we talked about. Stay calm. Don't let them provoke you. We've got legal standing now. They can't just take the girls." "Can't they?" Eliza's voice was brittle with fear. "They brought a judge, Rowan.
That means they've got something. A ruling, maybe, or a warrant. Maybe. Or maybe they're just trying to intimidate us. He crossed to her, putting his hands on her shoulders. It was the most physical contact they'd had since the wedding kiss, and he felt her tense under his touch. Listen to me. You are not alone in this. Not anymore. Whatever they've got, we face it together. Understand? Eliza nodded, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm scared. I know, me too. It was the first time he'd admitted it out loud. But fear's just another kind of weather. We endure it and keep moving. The convoy pulled into the yard with unnecessary fanfare. 6 hired men on horseback, 2 carriages, and enough legal documents to wallpaper the barn. Pemberton climbed out of the first carriage, looking smug. The second carriage door opened and a woman stepped out. Genevieve Ashcroft was exactly what Rowan expected. Mid-40s, dressed in expensive black silk that had no business on a Texas ranch. Her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. But it was her expression that told him everything he needed to know. Cold. Calculating. The look of someone who viewed children as property to be managed, not people to be loved. Behind her came the judge, an older man with white mutton chops and a harried expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Hamilton, Rowan knew him slightly from town business. Fair man, mostly, but easily swayed by people with money and connections. Rowan stepped onto the porch, Eliza beside him. The ranch hands had gathered in a loose semicircle around the yard, not threatening, but present. Tom stood near the barn, rifle held casually, but ready. Mr. Mercer, Pemberton called out, how fortuitous that you're here saves us the trouble of finding you. This is my ranch, Rowan said flatly. Where else would I be? Indeed, Pemberton gestured to Genevieve. Allow me to introduce Mrs. Genevieve Ashcroft, legal guardian of Clara and Ivy Ashcroft. Former guardian, Rowan corrected. The girls are under my protection now, as is my wife. Genevieve's eyes narrowed. Ah, yes. The convenient marriage. How very predictable. Her voice was cultured, dripping with barely concealed contempt. Did you really think a hastily arranged ceremony would fool anyone, Mr. Mercer? We know exactly what this is, a desperate attempt to circumvent the law. It's a legal marriage, Eliza said, her voice shaking but determined. Witnessed and recorded. That makes me Mrs. Mercer, and Clara and Ivy are part of this household. Illegally, Genevieve snapped. You kidnapped those children from my care. You have no blood claim to them, no legal right. This marriage changes nothing. Actually, it changes quite a bit, Rowan said, but I'm sure Judge Hamilton can explain the legal intricacies better than I can. All eyes turned to the judge, who looked deeply uncomfortable. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Ashcroft has brought a petition for immediate return of custody. Given the circumstances of the children's removal from Boston, there's substantial legal basis for what? Rowan interrupted. For ripping 2 little girls away from the only person who's shown them real love and care? For dragging them back to a house where they were treated like inconveniences? How dare you, Genevieve hissed. I provided those children with everything, education, shelter, proper moral guidance, far more than some frontier housekeeper and her convenient husband could ever offer. You locked them in a nursery, Eliza said, and Rowan heard the fury building beneath her fear. You ignored Ivy's nightmares, Claire's questions. You were planning to send Ivy to an institution because she cried too much. I was planning to get her proper medical care, Genevieve corrected icily. The child is clearly disturbed. She needs structure, discipline, professional intervention, not coddling from an unfit. Watch your mouth, Rowan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You're on my land. I'd remember that if I were you. Genevieve smiled, cold and sharp. Threaten me all you want, Mr. Mercer. It doesn't change the facts. Those children belong to me. Their father's will clearly states I am their guardian. This woman has no legal claim. And you, sir, are aiding and abetting a kidnapping. Judge Hamilton has the authority to remove the children immediately and arrest both of you for contempt. Actually, Judge Hamilton said carefully, the marriage does complicate matters legally. Mrs. Mercer, the former Miss Vale, now has legal standing as the wife of a property owner. Any custody petition would need to go through proper court proceedings, which could take months. Months? Genevieve's composure cracked slightly. That's unacceptable. Every day those children spend in this hovel is a day they're being damaged beyond repair. Funny, Tom called out from the barn. "They seem a damn sight happier than when they first got here." "No one asked your opinion," Pemberton snapped. "Don't need asking to speak truth on my own land," Tom shot back. Judge Hamilton held up his hands. "Gentlemen, please." "Mrs. Ashcroft, while I understand your concern, the law is quite clear. Without evidence of immediate danger or neglect, I cannot simply remove children from a legally established household. You'll need to file proper custody petitions in the district court." "They were kidnapped!" Genevieve was losing her careful control now, anger bleeding through. "Stolen from my home in the dead of night. How is that not grounds for immediate action?" "Because the person who took them is now legally married and has established residency in Texas," the judge explained patiently. "Different jurisdiction, different laws. You'll need to—" "I know what I need to do," Genevieve interrupted. She turned her cold gaze on Eliza. "You think you've won. You think this pathetic charade will protect you. But I have resources you can't even imagine. Lawyers, connections, judges who owe me favors. I will bury you in litigation until you have nothing left. And when I'm done, when those children are back where they belong, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. A lying, scheming, manipulative—" "That's enough," Rowan said. But Genevieve was on a roll, her careful facade completely shattered. "Your mother was a whore who spread her legs for my cousin and got what she deserved, a bastard daughter and a pauper's grave. You're no better, probably worse, using children as leverage to trap a husband. Did you sleep with him before the wedding? Is that how you convinced him to—" Rowan moved before he could think. One moment he was on the porch, the next he was standing 3 feet from Genevieve, close enough that she actually took a step back, fear flickering across her face. "Get off my land," he said quietly. "Now." "You can't." "I can, and I am. You've got 5 minutes to get back in your fancy carriage and leave. After that, my men start escorting you off at gunpoint. Your choice." Judge Hamilton cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Mercer, I don't think—" "With respect, Your Honor, this isn't a courtroom. This is private property, and that woman just slandered my wife. In Texas, we take that seriously." Rowan didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The promise of violence was clear enough. 5 minutes. Pemberton was already ushering Genevieve back toward the carriage, whispering urgently in her ear. She resisted at first, but a glance at the armed ranch hands convinced her that discretion was the better part of valor. She climbed into the carriage, but not before shooting one last venomous look at Eliza. "This isn't over," she called out. "Those children are mine. I will have them back, and you'll regret ever crossing me." The carriage pulled away, followed by the hired men and a very uncomfortable Judge Hamilton. Pemberton lingered just long enough to say, "We'll be filing in district court within the week. I suggest you find yourself a very good lawyer, Mr. Mercer." Then they were gone, dust settling in their wake. The silence that followed was deafening. Rowan turned to find Eliza sitting on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. He sat down beside her, not touching, just present. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. The things she said about my mother, about me, weren't true," Rowan finished. "Angry people say ugly things. Doesn't make them real. But she's going to do it. She's going to bury us in legal proceedings. She's got money and we don't. How are we supposed to fight that?" Rowan looked out at his ranch, the land he'd built through years of backbreaking work, the home he'd created from nothing. He thought about Clara in the barn, probably listening to every word, about Ivy upstairs, hopefully sheltered from the worst of it. "We find a lawyer," he said. "We sell cattle if we have to, take out loans, do whatever it takes. She wants a fight? We'll give her one." Eliza lifted her head, eyes red but fierce. "You'd really do that? Risk everything?" "Already did when I married you," Rowan pointed out. "Might as well see it through." From the barn, Tom called out, "Found something you might want to see." They walked over to find Tom holding a piece of paper that must have fallen from one of the carriages. It was a legal document, and as Rowan scanned it, his blood ran cold. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "Petition for custody," Rowan said slowly. "Filed 3 weeks ago in Boston, before we got married." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "They were already planning to take the girls back before they even knew where you were." "But that means the marriage didn't prompt this." "They were coming for them anyway." Rowan's mind raced through implications. "Which also means our marriage is legitimate in the eyes of the law. not a response to legal pressure, but a genuine union that happened to coincide with their search. For the first time since the confrontation, something like hope flickered across Eliza's face. That helps us. Maybe. Or maybe it just makes the fight more complicated. Rowan folded the document carefully. Either way, we've got work to do, and not much time to do it. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, Rowan sat on the porch with a whiskey and a head full of problems that didn't have easy solutions. Inside, he could hear Eliza reading to the girls, her voice steady despite everything that had happened. They'd bought themselves time, weeks, maybe months. But Genevieve wasn't going to back down. She had pride and money and the absolute conviction that she was right. That made her dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the law. The real question was whether Rowan and Eliza could build something strong enough to withstand that kind of assault. A marriage that had started as strategy would need to become something more, something real enough that no judge could dismiss it as convenience. And Rowan wasn't sure either of them knew how to do that. But as Ivy's laugh floated through the open window, bright and unafraid, he thought maybe they'd figure it out, or die trying. The lawyer Rowan found in town was a disappointment from the moment he walked through the door. Samuel Porter was young, too young, with ink-stained fingers and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles every 30 seconds. He'd set up practice in a cramped office above the general store 3 months ago, fresh from some law school back east with more book learning than practical experience. But he was the only attorney within a 50-mile radius who didn't have ties to the wealthy ranching families that dominated the county, and that made him their best option by default. "So let me make sure I understand correctly," Porter said, shuffling through the documents Rowan had laid on his desk. "You married Miss Vale, Mrs. Mercer, I should say, 8 days ago. The ceremony was witnessed and legally recorded. Prior to this marriage, she had been caring for her 2 half-sisters, who were removed from the custody of their legal guardian in Boston approximately 6 months ago." "That's the situation," Rowan confirmed. He sat across from Porter with his hat in his lap, watching the young lawyer's face for any sign of confidence. So far, he wasn't seeing much. "And Mrs. Ashcroft is claiming kidnapping, asserting her rights as the guardian named in the father's will, and has filed for immediate return of custody." Porter removed his spectacles, cleaned them on his sleeve, replaced them. "Mr. Mercer, I'll be honest with you. This is complicated." "I gathered that much myself." "No, I mean legally complicated in ways that could go very badly for you and your wife." Porter leaned forward, his young face serious. "Mrs. Ashcroft has a legitimate claim. The will explicitly names her as guardian. Your wife's connection to the children, while emotionally significant, carries no legal weight. She's a half-sibling with no recognized relationship to the deceased parents." "The marriage changes that," Rowan said. "Perhaps. But here's the problem. The timing makes it look like a strategy rather than a genuine union. Genevieve's lawyers will argue that you married solely to circumvent her legal custody. If they can prove that, a judge might invalidate the marriage or, at minimum, dismiss it as a factor in custody considerations." Eliza, who'd been silent until now, spoke up from her chair by the window. "So you're saying we have no chance?" "I'm saying the odds aren't favorable." Porter looked at her with something like sympathy. "But they're not impossible either. If we can demonstrate that the marriage is genuine, that you provide a stable home, and most importantly, that the children's best interests are served by remaining with you, we might have a case." "How do we prove the marriage is genuine when it isn't?" Eliza's voice was flat. "We married for exactly the reason they're going to claim, to protect the girls." Porter hesitated, glancing between them. "Is that all it was? Legal strategy?" The question hung in the air. Rowan thought about the past week, about reading to Ivy every night, about the way Clara had started asking his opinion on things, about the strange comfort of coming home to a house that smelled like cooking and had voices in it. He thought about Eliza working herself to exhaustion, trying to prove she belonged there, about the careful distance they maintained even though they were supposed to be husband and wife. "It started that way," Rowan said carefully. "What it is now, that's harder to define." "Well, you'd better define it before you get in front of a judge," Porter said bluntly, "because Genevieve's attorneys are going to dissect every aspect of your relationship. When you met, how you courted, why you married so quickly. If there's any inconsistency, any hint that this is a sham,
They'll use it to destroy your credibility.
Then we tell the truth, Eliza said. I came here as a housekeeper. Rowan didn't know about the girls until I arrived. When Genevieve's lawyer threatened to take them, Rowan offered marriage as a way to give me legal standing. We didn't love each other. We barely knew each other. But we both wanted to protect two frightened children, and that was enough. Porter considered this. It's risky. Admitting the marriage was strategic could backfire. But honesty might actually work in your favor. It shows you're not trying to deceive the court, just trying to do right by the children. He made a note on his paper. We'd need character witnesses, people who can testify to the stability of your home, your fitness as guardians. The ranch hands, Rowan said. They've seen how the girls have settled in. Tom Wickham especially. He's known me for years.
Good. We'll also need testimony about the conditions in Mrs. Ashcroft's home, evidence that the children were neglected or mistreated. Porter looked at Eliza. Can you provide that? I can describe what I saw. The locked nursery, the isolation, the plans to institutionalize Ivy, but I don't have proof. No documents, no witnesses besides the servants, and they're all employed by Genevieve. They won't testify against her.
What about the girls themselves? Porter asked. In custody cases, judges sometimes interview the children privately to determine their wishes. Rowan shook his head. Claire's 8, Ivy's 5. You really think a judge is going to put weight on what they want? Depends on the judge, and on how well the children can articulate their feelings. Porter tapped his pencil against the desk. It's not ideal to rely on children's testimony, but in this case, it might be our strongest card. If they can clearly express their preference to stay with you and explain why in a way that demonstrates genuine attachment rather than coaching. They haven't been coached, Eliza said sharply. We've told them to be honest, nothing more. I believe you, but the opposing counsel won't. They'll claim you've manipulated the children, poisoned them against Mrs. Ashcroft. Porter sighed. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be ugly. Genevieve Ashcroft has money and connections. She can afford the best lawyers in the state. I'm not that. But you'll take the case, Rowan said. Yes, because despite the odds, I think you might be right. Those children might be better off here. Porter straightened his papers. I'll need a retainer, $50 to start, with more required as the case progresses. Court fees, filing costs, my time, it's going to add up quickly. Rowan had expected this. I can sell some cattle, should cover the initial costs. And if it goes to trial, if this drags out for months? Porter's expression was grave. You could be looking at hundreds of dollars, maybe more. Are you prepared for that? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Mr. Mercer. You could settle, negotiate some kind of visitation arrangement with Mrs. Ashcroft. It wouldn't be ideal, but it would be cheaper and faster than a protracted legal battle. Rowan looked at Eliza, saw the fear and determination warring in her eyes. Then he thought about Ivy's nightmares, about Clara's hard-earned smiles, about what it would mean to send them back to a woman who saw them as possessions rather than people. No settlement, he said. We fight. Porter nodded slowly. Then we'd better get to work. They left the lawyer's office an hour later with a list of tasks and a timeline that made Rowan's head spin. Depositions needed to be scheduled, witnesses prepared, documents filed. Porter estimated they had maybe 6 weeks before the case went before a judge, 8 if they were lucky. 6 weeks to prove they were a real family. 6 weeks to save 2 little girls from a fate worse than death. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Eliza sat beside Rowan on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, that 2 big rings spinning loose on her finger. The afternoon sun beat down on them, turning the dusty road into a shimmering ribbon of heat. $50, she said finally. That's a lot of money. It's what it costs. And if we lose, you'll have spent all that money for nothing. Rowan guided the horses around a rut in the road. If we lose, money's going to be the least of our problems. Eliza was quiet for a moment. I could leave, take the girls and run again, save you the expense and the trouble. We've had this conversation. I know, but Eliza. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her. You're not running, not anymore. We made a commitment when we got married, strategic or not. I don't break my word, even when keeping it might cost you everything. Even then, Rowan met her eyes. Besides, where would you go? They found you once. They'll find you again. At least here you've got walls and witnesses and a husband who's too stubborn to quit. Something flickered across her face. Gratitude, maybe, or fear, or something more complicated than either. I don't understand you. Join the club. I don't understand me half the time either. That pulled a small, reluctant smile from her. The girls are going to ask questions about the lawyer, about what happens next. Then we tell them the truth, or enough of it that they're not scared. Rowan picked up the reins again. They're tougher than you think, Eliza. Kids usually are.
I know they're tough. That's what worries me. They've had to be tough their whole lives. I wanted to give them something different, safety, stability, a place where they didn't have to be strong all the time. You did give them that. This ranch, this house, it's the safest they've been in months, isn't it? For now. But what happens when Genevieve wins, when the judge orders them back to Boston?
We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. Rowan started the horses moving again. Right now, we focus on the fight in front of us. Everything else is just noise. They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the ranch came into view, Rowan felt something in his chest ease slightly. Home. Strange how quickly that word had attached itself to this place, how the sight of the weathered house and sprawling pastures had become synonymous with safety. Clara was waiting on the porch when they pulled up. She'd been watching the road, Rowan could tell, worry etched into her young face. "What did the lawyer say?" she asked as soon as they climbed down from the wagon. "He said we've got a fight ahead of us," Rowan told her, "but he's willing to help." "Are we going to lose?" The question was direct, unflinching. Clara had never been one to hide from hard truths. "Don't know yet," Rowan said honestly, "but we're not giving up without a fight." Clara nodded, processing this. "What do you need me to do?" "Be yourself. When the time comes, tell the truth about what you want and why. That's all anyone can ask." "And if they don't listen?" Rowan crouched down until he was eye level with her. "Then we make them listen, one way or another." That seemed to satisfy her. She went back inside, her small shoulders set with determination that was heartbreaking in someone so young. Eliza watched her go, then turned to Rowan. She shouldn't have to fight for the right to stay in a home that wants her. "No," Rowan agreed. "She shouldn't, but that's the world we're living in, and wishing it different won't change it." The next few weeks fell into a pattern that was equal parts domestic routine and preparation for war. Mornings were spent on ranch work. Cattle needed tending regardless of legal battles. Afternoons were devoted to meetings with Porter, reviewing testimony, preparing for the depositions that would come. Evenings belonged to the girls, to maintaining some semblance of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. Tom and the other ranch hands agreed to testify, though Tom grumbled about having to wear proper clothes and speak in front of a judge. The general store owner, Mrs. Chen, offered a character reference for Eliza, having been impressed by her dedication to the girls during their occasional trips to town. Even old Doc Morrison, who'd treated Ivy for a fever the week prior, said he'd speak to the child's improved health since coming to the ranch. But it was the girls themselves who would carry the most weight, and that knowledge sat heavy on all of them. Porter came to the ranch one afternoon to prepare Clara and Ivy for the possibility of being questioned by the judge. He was gentle with them, especially Ivy, but even his careful questions made the younger girl shrink back against Eliza. "Ivy, sweetheart," Porter said softly, "I need to ask you some questions, okay? Just to help me understand. Can you tell me about your old home, the one in Boston?" Ivy's thumb went to her mouth, her eyes going wide and frightened. "Don't want to. I know it's hard, but it's important." "Leave her alone," Clara said sharply, moving to stand between Porter and her sister. "She doesn't remember much anyway. She was only 4 when our parents died." "Clara, I understand you want to protect her, but I said leave her alone." Clara's voice had gone hard, and Rowan recognized the defensive stance, the protective fury. She'd been taking care of Ivy too long to let anyone push the younger girl into distress, even someone trying to help. "It's all right," Eliza said quietly, pulling Ivy into her lap. "Mr. Porter, maybe we should focus on Clara for now. Ivy's too young to understand what's happening." Porter nodded, looking frustrated but resigned. "Very well. Clara, can you tell me about Mrs. Ashcroft? What was she like as a guardian?" Clara's jaw set. "Cold. She didn't like having us around. Kept us locked in the nursery most days because she said children were meant to be quiet. When Ivy cried, which was a lot, because she missed our mama, Mrs. Ashcroft would have the servants move us further away so she wouldn't have to hear it. Did she ever hurt you? Physically? No. She never hit us or anything. But she was going to send Ivy away. I heard her talking to the doctor about institutions for difficult children. She said Ivy was too emotional, too damaged, and needed professional intervention. Claire's voice shook with anger. Ivy's not damaged. She's just sad. She needed love, not some hospital. Porter made notes. And when Miss Vale, Mrs. Mercer, came to visit, what happened? At first, Mrs. Ashcroft let her see us a few times. Then she got angry and said Miss Eliza had no right to the children of a legitimate marriage. She told Miss Eliza to leave and never come back. Clara looked at Eliza with fierce loyalty. But she did come back. She saved us. By taking you without permission. By taking us away from a place where nobody wanted us, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Porter studied the girl for a long moment. You're very articulate for 8 years old. I'm smart for 8 years old, Clara said without arrogance, just stating fact. And I know what I want. I want to stay here with Miss Eliza and Mr. Mercer. This is my home now. Even though you've only been here a few weeks? Time doesn't matter. Home is where people want you, where they listen when you talk and don't lock you away because you're inconvenient. Clara's eyes were fierce. This is home. After Porter left, Rowan found Eliza in the kitchen staring at a pot of stew she'd been stirring for the past 10 minutes without actually seeing it. She's going to have to say all that in court, Eliza said without preamble. In front of Genevieve and the lawyers and everyone. They're going to tear her apart. She can handle it. She's 8 years old, Rowan. She shouldn't have to handle it. I know. He moved to stand beside her, taking the spoon from her hand before she wore a hole in the pot. But she's got more strength than most grown men I've known. She'll get through it. And what about Ivy? Porter's right. The judge is going to want to hear from both of them. But Ivy can barely speak to strangers without having a panic attack. Then we prepare her as best we can, and if she can't do it, she can't do it. We won't force her. Rowan set the spoon aside. Porter said Clara's testimony alone might be enough. She's old enough to be taken seriously, and she's clear about what she wants. Eliza turned to face him, and he was struck by how exhausted she looked. The past weeks had worn on her, stress etching lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. What if it's not enough? What if the judge decides blood and money matter more than love and safety? Then we appeal. We fight it at the next level. With what money? We're already spending everything you have on this case. I'll sell more cattle, take out a loan against the ranch if I have to. Rowan, no. Eliza grabbed his arm. I won't let you lose your ranch over this. It's not worth... Don't. He cut her off sharply. Don't you dare say those girls aren't worth it. I wasn't going to say that. Her voice dropped. I was going to say, I'm not worth it. Rowan stared at her. You think this is about you, isn't it? I'm the one who brought this trouble to your door. I'm the one who got you tangled up in a legal mess that could destroy everything you've built. If I hadn't been so desperate, so foolish, you'd have what? Let those girls suffer in silence? Abandon them to a woman who saw them as burdens? Rowan shook his head. You did what you had to do, what any decent person would do. That's not foolishness. That's courage. Courage that's costing you everything. Maybe. Or maybe it's giving me something I didn't know I was missing. The words came out before Rowan could stop them, true and raw and more honest than he'd intended to be. Eliza went very still. What do you mean? Rowan struggled to put it into words. This ranch. It was supposed to be enough. Work and solitude and no complications. I thought that's what I wanted. What I needed after... He trailed off, the old ghosts of war and loss rising up. But these past weeks, having you and the girls here, hearing voices in the house, coming home to something other than silence, it's made me realize how empty things were before. Rowan, I'm not saying this is a real marriage. I know what we agreed to, but it's not nothing either. These girls, they matter. You matter. And if fighting for you costs me every penny I have, so be it. Money I can earn back. He gestured vaguely at the house, at the life they'd been building. This I can't replace. Eliza's eyes were bright with tears. You're a good man, Rowan Mercer. Better than you give yourself credit for. I'm a stubborn man who doesn't know when to quit. There's a difference.
She laughed, watery but genuine. Maybe they're the same thing. Before Rowan could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Ivy ran in, tears streaming down her face. She threw herself at Eliza, sobbing into her skirts. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Eliza knelt down, trying to see Ivy's face. "Bad dream," Ivy hiccuped. "The storm came and took you away, and I was alone again." "Oh, baby, it was just a dream. I'm right here." "But what if it's not? What if they take you away for real? What if they make us go back?" Ivy's small hands fisted in Eliza's dress, clinging desperately. "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back." Eliza looked helplessly at Rowan. This was the fear they'd been trying to shield the girls from, and it had found them anyway. Children always knew when the adults were scared, no matter how hard you tried to hide it.
Rowan crouched down beside them.
"Ivy, look at me."
The little girl turned her tear-stained face toward him. "No one's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. Not without a fight. You understand? Miss Eliza and we're not going to let that happen." "But what if you can't stop them?" It was the question they'd all been avoiding, the nightmare scenario no one wanted to voice. Rowan could have offered false promises, could have told her everything would be fine, but Ivy deserved better than lies. "Then we'll keep fighting," he said, "as long as it takes, as hard as we can. And no matter what happens, you'll never be alone again. That's a promise." "You promise?" Ivy's voice was tiny, fragile with hope. "I promise." She studied his face with those huge eyes, looking for any sign of dishonesty. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded and let Eliza lift her up. But as Eliza carried her back upstairs for another attempt at sleep, Rowan was left alone with the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The depositions began 2 weeks later, held in Judge Hamilton's chambers in town. Rowan went first, answering questions from both Porter and Genevieve's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Aldrich who specialized in making honest people sound like liars. "Mr. Mercer, you claim this marriage to Miss Vale, Mrs. Mercer, was not strategically motivated. Is that correct?" "I claim it was motivated by wanting to help 3 people who needed it," Rowan said carefully, repeating the answer Porter had coached him on. "How noble. And the fact that your marriage conveniently granted Mrs. Mercer legal standing just as my client was preparing to reclaim her wards, that's pure coincidence?" "Didn't say it was coincidence, said it was necessary." Aldrich's eyebrows rose. "Necessary? Because you'd fallen deeply in love with Miss Vale after knowing her for less than 2 weeks? Because 2 little girls needed protection, and marriage was the fastest way to provide it legally. So you admit the marriage was a strategic decision rather than a romantic one." Porter started to object, but Rowan held up a hand. "I admit we got married to keep the girls safe. What it's become since then is something different, something better. How convenient that your feelings deepened right around the time you needed them to for legal purposes." Aldrich's tone dripped sarcasm. "Tell me, Mr. Mercer, do you love your wife?" The question hung in the air. Rowan looked at Aldrich, then at Porter, then at the court stenographer, dutifully recording every word. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up in respect and growing affection, and something that might eventually be love, but wasn't there yet. But admitting that would give Aldrich ammunition. "I married her," Rowan said finally. "I protect her. I'm building a life with her. Call that whatever you want. I'll call it evasion, Mr. Mercer. A simple yes or no would suffice." "Love's not simple. Anyone who thinks it is hasn't lived much." Aldrich made a note. "How much money have you spent on legal fees for this case so far?" The shift in topic was deliberate, designed to throw Rowan off balance. "About $70? And you're prepared to spend more? Perhaps hundreds more if this goes to trial. If that's what it takes. For children who aren't yours. For a wife you've known less than a month. That seems like quite a financial commitment for what you claim is merely a strategic arrangement. I take care of what's mine. Those girls are mine now. So is Eliza." "Yours." Aldrich leaned forward. "Like property, you mean?" "Like family," Rowan corrected, anger edging into his voice. "Which is more than your client ever treated them as." "Careful, Mr. Mercer. This is a deposition, not a saloon fight." The session continued for another hour, Aldrich probing every aspect of the marriage, the living arrangements, Rowan's motivations. By the time it ended, Rowan felt like he'd been through a verbal boxing match, and this was just the beginning. Eliza's deposition was worse. Rowan waited outside the chambers, pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Through the door, he could occasionally hear raised voices, Aldrich pressing, Eliza defending, Porter objecting. When she finally emerged 2 hours later, she looked shaken but defiant. "How bad?" Rowan asked. "They tried to make me admit I seduced you, that I used the girls as leverage to trap a husband." Her voice was tight with fury. "Aldrich actually asked if I was pregnant, if that was the real reason for the rushed marriage." Rowan's hands clenched into fists. "That son of a—" Porter objected. "It's not in the record." Eliza leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "But it's what they think. What they'll whisper in the courtroom, that I'm some kind of opportunist who manipulated a lonely rancher. Anyone who knows you knows that's garbage. But the judge doesn't know me. He'll hear Genevieve's version, wealthy, respectable widow versus desperate bastard daughter. Which story do you think he'll believe?" Rowan didn't have an answer for that. The weeks crawled by in a haze of preparation and mounting dread. Porter filed motions and counter-motions. Witnesses were interviewed. Character references were collected. And through it all, life on the ranch continued with a strange dual quality. Surface normalcy covering the undercurrent of fear. Clara stopped sleeping well. Rowan would hear her pacing her room at night, restless and anxious. She threw herself into ranch work with fierce determination, as if proving her usefulness would somehow guarantee her place there. Tom started teaching her to rope cattle, and she attacked the lessons with single-minded intensity. Ivy regressed slightly, becoming clingy and fearful. She wouldn't let Eliza out of her sight, following her from room to room like a small, frightened shadow. The nightmares came back, violent dreams that left her screaming in the night. Rowan found himself sitting with her more and more, reading stories until she calmed enough to sleep. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, something shifted between Rowan and Eliza. It was small things at first, the way she'd started pouring his coffee in the morning without asking how he took it, because she'd learned his preferences. The way he'd taken to checking on her before bed, making sure she had everything she needed. Conversations that stretched longer than necessary, finding reasons to stay in the same room even when there was work to be done elsewhere. One evening, about a week before the trial was scheduled, Rowan found her crying in the kitchen. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down her face while she kneaded bread dough with mechanical precision. "Eliza?" She didn't look up. "I'm fine. You're crying." "I said I'm fine." Her hands worked faster, taking out frustration on the innocent dough. "Just tired." Rowan moved closer, gently taking the dough from her hands and setting it aside. "Talk to me. What's there to say? We've done everything we can, prepared every argument, gathered every witness, and it still might not be enough." She finally looked at him, eyes red and lost. "I keep thinking about what happens if we lose. Where the girls will go, how scared they'll be, whether Genevieve will punish them for wanting to stay with me." "We're not going to lose." "You don't know that." "No, but I know we've fought harder for this than Genevieve's fighting against it. That's got to count for something." Eliza laughed bitterly. "Does it? Or does money and blood and social standing count for more?" Rowan didn't have an answer that wouldn't be a lie. So instead, he did something he'd been carefully avoiding for weeks. He pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, surprised, but then she collapsed against him, finally letting herself break down. Her tears soaked into his shirt while he held her, one hand awkwardly patting her back because he'd never been good at comfort, but was trying anyway. "I'm so scared," she whispered against his chest. "I'm terrified." "I know. Me too." That admission seemed to help somehow. They stood there in the kitchen while the bread dough sat forgotten and the sun set outside. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something else entirely. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes on her apron, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. For fighting when you didn't have to." "Stop thanking me. We're family now. Family fights for each other." "Are we? Family?" The question was tentative, hoping. Rowan thought about the past weeks, about reading to Ivy and teaching Clara and arguing with Eliza about everything from how to cook beans to whether the barn needed repainting, about the way the house felt when they were all in it, versus the emptiness when he was alone. Yeah, he said. I think we are. Something shifted in her expression, relief and hope, and a dozen other things he didn't have names for. She reached up and touched his face, gentle and uncertain. Rowan? Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by Clara calling from upstairs. Miss Eliza, Ivy's having another nightmare. The moment broke. Eliza pulled away, wiping her eyes one more time. I should go. Yeah, but she paused in the doorway looking back. This thing between us, whatever it's becoming, we should probably talk about it. After the trial. After the trial, Rowan agreed. She disappeared upstairs, leaving him alone with a kitchen full of unfinished bread and a chest full of feelings he wasn't equipped to process. Somewhere along the way, this strategic marriage had stopped being strategy and started being real. And that terrified him almost as much as losing the case. The night before the trial, Rowan couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch in the darkness, whiskey in hand, staring at stars that didn't have answers to any of his questions. Tomorrow, everything they'd built would be tested. Tomorrow, a judge would decide whether love and commitment mattered more than blood and money. Tomorrow, they'd either win the right to stay together or lose everything that mattered. The door creaked open behind him. Eliza stepped out, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. She didn't ask permission, just sat down beside him on the porch steps. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Nope. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooting somewhere in the distance, cattle shifting in their sleep, the wind moving through the grass like whispered secrets. Porter came by earlier, Eliza said finally, while you were checking the fence line. He wanted to go over tomorrow's strategy one more time. And he thinks we have a decent chance. Not a guarantee, but decent. She pulled the shawl tighter. He also said the girls will definitely be questioned, both of them. The judge wants to hear directly from them. Rowan's jaw tightened. Ivy's not ready for that. I know, but we don't have a choice. Eliza's voice cracked slightly. I talked to her tonight, tried to prepare her. She just kept asking me if she had to go back to the dark room. What dark room? The nursery. In Genevieve's house. Ivy called it the dark room because the curtains were always drawn. She was terrified of it. Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. That's where they'll send her if we lose. Back to the dark room and the locked door and the loneliness. And there's not a damn thing I can do to stop it. We'll stop it together, Rowan said. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, we tell them everything, every truth, every fact. We make them see those girls as people, not property. And we trust that somewhere under all that legal nonsense, there's a judge who still remembers what justice actually means. Eliza looked at him, and even in the darkness he could see the tears on her face. When did you become an optimist? I'm not. I'm just too stubborn to accept defeat before the fight's over. She laughed, soft and sad. I'm glad I met you, Rowan Mercer. Even if this all goes to hell tomorrow, I'm glad for these weeks, for seeing what a real home could be. It's not going to hell. But if it does, it won't. Rowan, please, let me say this. She turned to face him fully. If it does, if they take the girls, I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Not coming here, not marrying you, not fighting even though the odds were always against us. You gave us hope when we had none. You gave those girls a taste of what family should be. That matters, even if it doesn't last. Rowan set down his whiskey and took her hands in his. They were cold, trembling slightly, and he wrapped his larger hands around them, trying to offer warmth. Listen to me, he said quietly. Tomorrow, we're going to walk into that courtroom as a family, and we're going to walk out the same way. Claire and Ivy will come home with us, to this ranch, where they belong. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the hard part in the middle. You sound so sure. I have to be. Someone's got to believe we can win this. Eliza studied his face in the starlight. You really mean that, don't you? You actually think we have a chance? I think we have truth and love on our side, and I think that's got to be worth something, even in a world as broken as this one. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. Thank you for believing, even when I can't. They sat like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, two people who'd become anchors in a storm neither had expected. Eventually, the cold drove them back inside, but Rowan felt something had shifted between them. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The courthouse was smaller than Rowan expected, a squat limestone building that squatted in the center of town like it was trying to make itself important through sheer stubbornness. Inside, the air was stifling despite the early morning hour, and the wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious townspeople who'd come to watch the spectacle. Rowan sat at the plaintiff's table with Eliza on one side and Porter on the other, acutely aware of every eye in the room tracking their movements. Behind them, Tom and the ranch hands filled a bench, silent support in their Sunday clothes. Clara and Ivy waited in a small anteroom with the bailiff's wife, spared from witnessing the opening salvos of the battle being fought over their futures. Across the aisle, Genevieve Ashcroft sat like a queen in exile, her black dress severe and expensive, her face a mask of righteous certainty. Aldrich and two other lawyers flanked her, their table covered in neat stacks of documents that looked far more official than Porter's scattered papers. Judge Hamilton entered, and everyone stood. He was older than Rowan remembered from their brief encounter at the ranch, with tired eyes that had seen too many ugly cases and probably believed in justice less with each passing year. He settled into his chair with the air of a man preparing for an unpleasant task. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying despite its lack of volume. "We're here today to determine custody of two minor children, Clara and Ivy Ashcroft, currently residing with Mr. and Mrs. Rowan Mercer. Mrs. Genevieve Ashcroft has petitioned for immediate return of custody, claiming unlawful removal from her guardianship. Mr. Porter, you're representing the Mercers?" "Yes, Your Honor." Porter stood, adjusting his spectacles nervously. "We're contesting the petition on the grounds that the children's best interests are served by remaining in their current placement." "And Mr. Aldrich for Mrs. Ashcroft?" Aldrich rose smoothly, every inch the seasoned attorney. "Indeed, Your Honor. We'll be demonstrating that Mrs. Ashcroft is the legal guardian as designated by the children's late father's will, and that their removal constituted kidnapping, regardless of the subsequent marriage that conveniently legitimized the situation." Judge Hamilton sighed. "Let's try to keep the editorial comments to a minimum, gentlemen. This is about children, not scoring points. Mr. Aldrich, you may present your case." What followed was a systematic dismantling of Eliza's character and choices. Aldrich called witness after witness, servants from the Ashcroft estate who testified to the locked nursery door being found open the morning after Eliza's visit, to the children's belongings missing, to Genevieve's distress upon discovering them gone. A Boston constable described the missing persons report filed when the children vanished. A handwriting expert analyzed the letter Clara had sent to Eliza, suggesting it showed signs of adult coaching despite Clara having written it herself. Through it all, Eliza sat rigid beside Rowan, her hands clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. He wanted to reach over and take her hand, offer some comfort, but Porter had warned them about displays of affection in court. Aldrich would use it as evidence of performance rather than genuine connection. Then Genevieve herself took the stand. She was good, Rowan had to admit. Composed, articulate, painting a picture of a devoted guardian whose wards had been stolen by a desperate woman with no legal claim. She spoke of the education she'd planned for the girls, the social connections she could provide, the stable, respectable life they would lead under her care. "Mrs. Ashcroft," Aldrich said, his tone gentle and leading, "can you describe your relationship with Clara and Ivy?" "They are my late cousin's daughters," Genevieve said, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine emotion. "When their parents died, I took them in without hesitation. It was my duty as family, and I was honored to provide them a home." "And how did they respond to your care?" "Clara was always a serious child, perhaps a bit reserved, but I attributed that to grief. Ivy was more challenging, very emotional, prone to outbursts and nightmares. I consulted with the finest doctors seeking the best treatment for her condition." "What condition would that be?" "The doctors suggested she was experiencing severe melancholia brought on by the loss of her parents. They recommended specialized care, a therapeutic environment where trained professionals could help her process her grief properly." Rowan felt Eliza stiffen beside him. That wasn't how the servants had described it. They'd said Genevieve wanted Ivy institutionalized because the crying annoyed her, not out of concern for the child's well-being, but those servants weren't here, wouldn't testify against their employer. "And then Miss Vale appeared," Aldrich prompted. "Yes. She claimed to be Jonathan's illegitimate daughter, the product of an affair with a servant." Genevieve's lip curled slightly. I tried to be charitable, allowed her to visit the children a few times, thinking she might provide some connection to their father. But she became increasingly demanding, insisting on inappropriate levels of access, making wild accusations about my care of the girls. What sort of accusations? She claimed I was neglecting them, keeping them imprisoned, planning to abandon Ivy to some terrible institution. All lies, of course, designed to justify her ultimate theft of the children. And when you discovered they were gone, Genevieve's composure cracked, tears gathering in her eyes. I was devastated, terrified for their safety. This woman, this stranger, had taken two vulnerable children across the country to who knows where. I immediately contacted the authorities and hired investigators to find them. All I wanted was to bring my girls home. Your girls, Aldrich repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Thank you, Mrs. Ashcroft. No further questions. Porter stood for cross-examination, and Rowan could see the young lawyer's hand shaking slightly as he approached the witness stand. Mrs. Ashcroft, you testified that you took the children in without hesitation. Were you their only option for guardianship? I was the guardian named in their father's will, yes. But were you the only family member available? Did they have aunts, uncles, grandparents? Genevieve's expression tightened. There were other relatives, but I was chosen as the most appropriate. Most appropriate or most convenient? Isn't it true that as guardian you also controlled the trust fund their father left for their care? I managed their finances responsibly, as any guardian would. How much was in that trust, Mrs. Ashcroft? Aldrich stood. Objection, Your Honor. Financial matters are irrelevant to the question of custody. They're relevant if they show motive, Porter countered. Mrs. Ashcroft controls a substantial sum as long as she remains guardian. That gives her financial incentive to maintain custody, regardless of the children's well-being. Judge Hamilton considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Porter. Porter turned back to Genevieve. The trust fund, Mrs. Ashcroft. How much? Approximately $50,000, she said through gritted teeth. A murmur ran through the courtroom. That was a fortune, enough to live comfortably for a lifetime. Suddenly, Genevieve's determination to reclaim the girls took on a different dimension. And if you lose custody, you lose control of that money, correct? The funds are meant for the children's benefit. I have no personal interest. Please just answer the question. If custody is transferred to someone else, you no longer control the trust. Yes or no? Yes, but thank you. Now, these therapeutic institutions you consulted about for Ivy, can you name them? Genevieve hesitated. I don't recall the specific names. You don't recall? You were planning to place a 5-year-old child in specialized care, but you can't remember where. It was preliminary research. Nothing had been decided. The servants who worked in your home, they testified that Ivy cried frequently. Is that correct? She was a troubled child. Troubled or traumatized by losing her parents? Did you ever sit with her during these episodes, comfort her? I'm not a nursemaid, Mr. Porter. I employed staff for that purpose. So you paid other people to care for your grieving wards while you… what? Attended social functions, managed their inheritance? Objection. Aldrich was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Mr. Porter, save the theatrics. But the damage was done. Porter had planted doubt, shown the financial motive, painted Genevieve as distant and cold. It wasn't enough to win the case, but it was a start. The morning dragged on with more testimony, more legal maneuvering, more words that reduced two little girls to abstract concepts to be argued over. When Judge Hamilton finally called for a lunch recess, Rowan felt like he'd been holding his breath for hours. They ate in Porter's cramped office, sandwiches brought by the baker's wife who'd taken pity on them. Clara and Ivy joined them, both girls quiet and scared. Ivy climbed into Eliza's lap and refused to move, while Clara sat pressed against Rowan's side, seeking comfort in proximity. How's it going? Tom asked, having followed them from the courthouse. Porter removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. Hard to say. Aldrich built a strong case for Genevieve's legal rights, but I think I introduced enough doubt about her motives and character. The real test comes this afternoon. Why? Eliza asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Because that's when the girls testify. Ivy whimpered and buried her face in Eliza's shoulder. Clara's jaw set with determination, but Rowan could feel her trembling. Do they have to? Rowan asked. Ivy's terrified. If we don't present them, Aldrich will argue we're hiding them because their testimony would undermine our case. The judge wants to hear from them directly. I'm sorry, but there's no way around it. The afternoon session began with Clara on the witness stand, her small form nearly swallowed by the large chair. Judge Hamilton had her sworn in with a gentle tone that was the first bit of humanity Rowan had seen from him all day. Clara, I'm Judge Hamilton. I need to ask you some questions, all right? Just tell me the truth as you understand it. There are no wrong answers here. Clara nodded, her hands folded in her lap with unnatural stillness. Can you tell me about your home in Boston, the one with Mrs. Ashcroft? It was a big house, very quiet. We had to stay in the nursery most of the time because Mrs. Ashcroft didn't like noise. And how did that make you feel? Clara considered the question seriously. Lonely and scared for Ivy. She cried a lot after our parents died, and Mrs. Ashcroft would get angry about it. What did Mrs. Ashcroft do when she was angry? She'd have the servants move us to rooms farther away. Once she locked Ivy in a closet for an hour because she wouldn't stop crying during a dinner party. Genevieve made a sound of outrage. Aldrich whispered urgently to her, trying to maintain calm. That must have been difficult, Judge Hamilton said. What happened when Miss Vale, Mrs. Mercer, came to visit? She was nice to us, asked us questions, and actually listened to the answers. She looked at Ivy like she was a person, not a problem. Clara's voice grew stronger. When she stopped coming, I wrote her a letter asking her to come back. I knew we were supposed to stay with Mrs. Ashcroft, but I didn't care anymore. I wanted to be somewhere people wanted us. And do you feel wanted at the Mercer Ranch? Yes, sir. Mr. Mercer teaches me about horses and cattle. He doesn't get mad when I ask questions. And Miss Eliza, Mrs. Mercer, she hugs Ivy when she has nightmares instead of locking her away. We eat dinner together, and it's okay to talk. Clara struggled for words. It's what I thought family was supposed to be. Do you want to stay there? At the ranch? More than anything, Clara looked directly at Judge Hamilton, her young face fierce with conviction. Please don't send us back. I'll be good. I'll work hard. I'll help with everything. Just please let us stay. Rowan saw several people in the courtroom wiping their eyes. Even Judge Hamilton looked moved, though he maintained his professional demeanor. Aldrich's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to suggest that Clara had been coached, that her memories of Boston were exaggerated, that children her age couldn't make informed decisions about custody. But Clara held firm, answering each question with the same serious honesty that made her seem far older than 8. Then it was Ivy's turn. The little girl had to be carried to the witness stand by the bailiff, her thumb in her mouth, eyes wide with terror. She wouldn't look at anyone, just stared at her lap while tears rolled down her cheeks. Judge Hamilton's expression softened. Ivy, sweetheart, I just need to ask you a few questions. Is that all right? Ivy said nothing, just trembled. Can you tell me your name? Silence. Ivy, I know this is scary, but I need you to talk to me. Can you do that? Still nothing. Ivy's breathing was getting faster, panic setting in. Eliza half rose from her seat, instinct to comfort warring with courtroom protocol. Your Honor, Porter said quietly, perhaps we could have Mrs. Mercer sit with her. The child is clearly distressed. Aldrich objected immediately. That would be inappropriate. The witness needs to testify independently, without influence. She's 5 years old and having a panic attack, Porter shot back. Have some humanity. Judge Hamilton considered, then nodded. Mrs. Mercer, you may approach the bench, but you are not to speak to the child or influence her answers in any way. Understood? Eliza moved quickly to the witness stand, kneeling beside the chair so she was at Ivy's eye level. She didn't touch the little girl, didn't whisper encouragement, just positioned herself where Ivy could see her. The child's breathing slowed slightly, her eyes fixing on Eliza's face like a lifeline. Try again, Judge Hamilton said gently. Ivy, can you tell me where you live now? The ranch, Ivy whispered, so quiet the stenographer had to lean forward to hear. And do you like living there? A small nod. Can you tell me why? Ivy's thumb came out of her mouth. No dark rooms. Miss Eliza stays with me when I'm scared. Mr. Mercer reads stories. What about your old home? The one with Mrs. Ashcroft? Ivy's whole body tensed. Don't want to talk about it. I know it's hard, sweetheart, but I need to understand.
Were you happy there? No. The word was barely audible. Why not? Too quiet. Too dark. Nobody wanted to hear me. Ivy looked up at Judge Hamilton, tears streaming down her face. I was sad all the time, and they said I was broken. Who said that? Mrs. Ashcroft. She told the doctor I was broken and needed to be fixed somewhere else. Genevieve stood abruptly. That's a lie. I never said...
Sit down, Mrs. Ashcroft, Judge Hamilton ordered sharply. You'll have your opportunity to respond. But the damage was done. Ivy was sobbing now, full body shakes that made her unable to continue. Eliza finally broke protocol and pulled the child into her arms, whispering soothing words while Ivy clung to her. I think we're done here, Judge Hamilton said. Mr. Aldrich, do you really want to cross-examine a traumatized 5-year-old? For once, Aldrich looked uncertain. No, Your Honor, no questions. Eliza carried Ivy back to their table, the little girl refusing to let go. Rowan wanted to say something, do something, but he was trapped by procedure and protocol and the invisible walls of a courtroom that felt more like a prison. Porter called his remaining witnesses. Tom, who testified to the girl's improved health and happiness since coming to the ranch. Mrs. Chen, who spoke of Eliza's dedication and character. Doc Morrison, who provided medical evidence that Ivy's condition had improved significantly in the past weeks. Each one chipped away at Genevieve's case, building a picture of a family that functioned despite its unconventional origins. Finally, Rowan himself took the stand. Aldrich came at him hard, trying to paint him as either a fool manipulated by a desperate woman or opportunist seeking to control the girl's inheritance. Rowan answered each question with the same blunt honesty that had served him his whole life. Mr. Mercer, you married a woman you'd known for less than 2 weeks. That seems rather impulsive. It was necessary. Necessary for what? To legitimize her theft of the children? To protect 2 kids who needed protection? Call it whatever you want. I call it doing the right thing. How noble. And the fact that you now control their substantial trust fund through your wife, that's just a happy accident. I don't control anything. That money belongs to the girls. When they're grown, they'll get it. Until then, it sits where it is. I don't want it, and I don't need it. You expect this court to believe you have no financial interest in maintaining custody? Rowan leaned forward, looking Aldrich directly in the eye. I've spent over $100 in legal fees fighting for the right to raise 2 children who aren't mine by blood. I've put my ranch at risk, my reputation, my life. You tell me, does that sound like I'm after money? It sounds like you're in too deep to back out. It sounds like I found something worth fighting for, something that matters more than money or convenience or what people think is proper. Rowan glanced at Eliza, then at the girls. Those kids have had enough loss, enough pain. They deserve a home where they're wanted for who they are, not what they're worth. I can give them that. Can she? He gestured toward Genevieve, who looked like she wanted to spontaneously combust from rage. That's not for you to determine, Aldrich said coldly. No, it's for the judge. But I know what I've seen. Clara laughing while she works with the horses. Ivy sleeping through the night without nightmares for the first time in months. A house that feels like a home instead of a mausoleum. Rowan's voice was steady, certain. I'm not perfect. I'm rough around the edges and I don't know much about raising kids. But I show up, I listen, I protect what's mine. And those girls are mine now, same as if I'd fathered them myself. Even though you married their sister purely as legal strategy? I married Eliza because she was willing to sacrifice everything for those girls, because she saw 2 children suffering and couldn't walk away. That kind of courage, that kind of love. He stopped, surprised by his own words. Yeah, it started as strategy, but it became something real, something that matters. Aldrich had no response to that. He dismissed Rowan with a wave of disgust and called for a recess while he prepared his closing arguments. The final hour of the trial passed in a blur. Aldrich argued precedent and legal rights and the sanctity of properly executed wills. Porter countered with the children's testimony, their obvious attachment to the Mercers, the evidence of Genevieve's neglect. Both men spoke eloquently about justice and family and what was best for Clara and Ivy. But Rowan barely heard any of it. He was watching Judge Hamilton's face, trying to read which way the decision would fall. The old judge gave nothing away, just sat with his chin in his hand, looking tired and sad and like he wished he was anywhere else. Finally, both lawyers finished. Judge Hamilton straightened in his chair. I'm going to take a brief recess to consider my decision. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. They waited in the hallway, Ivy asleep in Eliza's arms from exhaustion, Clara pressed against Rowan's side. Tom and the ranch hands stood in a protective circle, keeping the curious townspeople at bay. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. When they were called back, Rowan's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, came down to whatever words were about to come out of Judge Hamilton's mouth. The judge looked at both tables, his expression grave. This has been one of the most difficult cases I've had to decide in my 20 years on the bench. On one hand, we have a legal guardian appointed by a valid will, a woman of means and social standing who can provide material benefits. On the other, we have a newly formed family built on unconventional foundations, but demonstrating genuine care and attachment. Rowan couldn't breathe. Beside him, Eliza's hand found his under the table, gripping tight enough to hurt. The law is clear about the rights of legal guardians, but the law also recognizes that the best interests of the child must be paramount. I've listened to testimony from both sides. I've heard from the children themselves, and I've had to weigh legal precedent against human reality. Get on with it, Rowan thought desperately. Mrs. Ashcroft, you are technically within your rights to reclaim custody. The will names you as guardian, and that carries legal weight. However, Judge Hamilton paused. However, the evidence suggests that your interest in these children is more financial than familial. The testimony about the conditions in your home, corroborated by the children's own words, raises serious concerns about your fitness as a guardian. Genevieve's face went pale. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, your marriage may have begun as a legal strategy, but I've seen enough marriages in this courtroom to recognize genuine attachment when I see it. More importantly, those children are thriving in your care in ways they clearly weren't before. Hope flared in Rowan's chest, dangerous and painful. Therefore, it is the decision of this court that custody of Clara and Ivy Ashcroft will remain with Mr. and Mrs. Rowan Mercer, pending a review in 6 months to ensure continued stability and proper care. The courtroom erupted. Genevieve was on her feet screaming about injustice and corruption. Aldrich was shouting objections. Tom and the ranch hands were cheering, and Rowan just sat there, stunned, barely believing what he'd just heard. They'd won. Eliza was crying, clutching Ivy so tight the little girl squeaked in protest. Clara threw her arms around Rowan's neck, and he hugged her back, this serious little girl who'd become his daughter in everything but blood. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel. Order. Mrs. Ashcroft, you have the right to appeal this decision, but for now it stands. The children will remain with the Mercers. This court is adjourned. As they left the courthouse, Genevieve blocked their path one last time. Her careful composure was completely shattered, face twisted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll appeal. I'll take this to higher courts. I'll spend every penny I have to take those children from you. Then you'll spend it all for nothing, Eliza said quietly. Because we're not giving them up. Not now. Not ever. You're nobody. A bastard who got lucky. You think this changes anything? You think marrying some frontier rancher makes you respectable? No, Eliza said, but it makes me their mother. And that's all that matters. They walked past her, a family in the truest sense, heading home to a ranch that had become something none of them expected. A place where broken people could heal, where love mattered more than blood, where second chances were possible even for those who thought they'd run out of options. The sunset was painting the sky gold and crimson as they drove back, the girls asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the day's emotion. Rowan held the reins with one hand, his other arm around Eliza's shoulders. She leaned into him, and it felt natural. Right. We did it, she whispered. Yeah, we did. What happens now? Rowan thought about the future stretching ahead, the appeal that might come, the 6-month review, the daily work of raising 2 girls who'd already been through too much. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like possibility. Now we go home, he said, and we build the life we fought for. And that's exactly what they did. The months that followed the trial didn't unfold like some fairy tale where everything suddenly became perfect. Real life was messier than that, full of setbacks and small victories, and days when Rowan wondered if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. The appeal came 3 weeks after the verdict, exactly as Genevieve had promised. Porter filed the necessary responses, and the waiting began again. Another shadow hanging over them, another deadline looming somewhere in the uncertain future. But this time felt different. They had Judge Hamilton's ruling in their favor. They had 6 months of documented stability to build on, and most importantly, they had stopped running. The ranch itself became both sanctuary and proving ground. Rowan threw himself into teaching Clara everything he knew about cattle and horses and the 100 small skills that kept a ranch functioning. She soaked it up with fierce concentration, asking questions that showed she was thinking ahead, planning for a future she could finally believe in. One afternoon in late fall, he found her in the barn trying to saddle Copper by herself. The mare was patient, but Clara was too small to lift the heavy saddle properly. She struggled with it, determination etched into every line of her small body, refusing to ask for help. "You're going to hurt yourself," Rowan said, stepping in to take the saddle from her hands. "I can do it," Clara protested, but her arms were shaking from the effort. "I know you can, but that doesn't mean you should do it alone." He positioned the saddle properly, then guided Clara's hands to show her the technique. "There's no shame in accepting help, kid. Smart people know when to ask for it." Clara looked up at him, something vulnerable in her expression. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough and you decide you don't want me anymore?" The question hit Rowan like a fist to the chest. "Clara, Mrs. Ashcroft said we were too much trouble, that nobody would really want us long-term because we came with too many problems." Her voice was small, scared in a way she rarely let herself be. What if she was right? Rowan crouched down until he was eye level with her. "Listen to me. You could mess up every day for the rest of your life, and I'd still want you here. You know why? Because you're my daughter now. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice. And choice is stronger than blood ever was."
"You really mean that? Have I ever lied to you?" Clara considered this seriously. "No." "Then believe me when I say you're stuck with me. For better or worse, you're a Mercer now. That means something."
She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with the desperate intensity of a child who'd spent too long believing she was disposable. Rowan hugged her back, this serious little girl who'd become the daughter he never knew he wanted, and felt something in his chest crack open, some last wall he'd been holding on to finally crumbling. Ivy's healing was slower, more fragile, full of backslides and breakthroughs that came in unexpected moments. The nightmares persisted for months, violent dreams that left her screaming in the darkness. But gradually, they became less frequent. She started venturing further from Eliza's side, exploring the ranch with cautious curiosity. She made friends with the barn cats, spent hours playing in the dirt, making elaborate kingdoms for bugs and beetles, slowly becoming a child instead of just a frightened shadow. The breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon in December. Ivy had been helping Eliza in the kitchen, more hindrance than help, really, but Eliza never said so, when thunder rumbled across the sky. Rowan tensed, waiting for the panic attack that had become routine during storms. Instead, Ivy just looked up at the ceiling, listening to the rain drum against the roof. "It's loud," she said calmly, "but we're safe inside." Eliza stopped kneading bread dough, staring at her sister in amazement. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe." "The dark room wasn't safe, but this house is." Ivy went back to playing with the measuring cups, as if she hadn't just articulated the core of her trauma and healing in 2 simple sentences. That night, Rowan found Eliza crying in their bedroom. Not sad tears, relieved ones. He'd gotten used to sharing the space with her over the past months, the initial awkwardness fading into comfortable routine. They still maintained careful boundaries, sleeping on opposite sides of the bed with space between them, but the arrangement felt less like strategy and more like partnership with each passing week. "She's going to be okay," Eliza whispered, wiping her eyes. "I was so scared she wouldn't be, that the damage was too deep. But she's healing." "Kids are tougher than we give them credit for," Rowan said. "When they feel safe, they can recover from almost anything." "Do you think we're doing this right, raising them?" It was a question Eliza asked often, usually late at night when doubt crept in. Rowan never had a good answer because the truth was, he didn't know. He was making it up as he went, relying on instinct and trial and error. "I think we're doing our best," he said, "and I think they know they're loved, That's got to count for something. Eliza looked at him in the lamplight, her expression soft and complicated. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn enough to keep trying even when I don't know what I'm doing. She laughed quietly. That might be the same thing. The 6-month review came in early spring, when the prairie was turning green and wildflowers dotted the landscape like scattered jewels. Judge Hamilton himself rode out to the ranch, eschewing formal courtroom proceedings for a personal inspection. Rowan had been expecting another legal battle, another fight to prove they deserved to keep the girls. Instead, he got a tired old judge who just wanted to see with his own eyes how things had turned out. Hamilton sat on the porch while Clara showed off her riding skills in the corral, her confidence with the horses evident in every movement. Ivy brought him wildflowers she'd picked, chattering about the barn cats in her garden plot and the story Rowan had read the night before. Inside, the house showed signs of family life. Clara's drawings on the kitchen wall, Ivy's collection of interesting rocks on the windowsill, Eliza's herbs drying in the pantry. You've done well, Hamilton said finally, accepting the coffee Eliza offered. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. You thought we'd fail, Rowan said. It wasn't a question. I thought the odds were against you. Unconventional families often struggle, especially when they're built on crisis rather than natural development. Hamilton sipped his coffee. But I've been wrong before. Those girls are thriving. Anyone can see it. Does this mean, Eliza started, hope and fear warring in her voice. It means I'll be filing a report recommending permanent custody be granted to you and your husband. Mrs. Ashcroft's appeal was denied last month. Did your lawyer inform you? Porter had sent a letter, but Rowan had been afraid to believe it was really over. He mentioned it. She's exhausted her legal options. Unless you do something egregiously negligent, those children are yours. Hamilton smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer. You've won. After he left, Eliza stood in the middle of the yard, looking dazed. It's really over. She can't take them anymore. No, she can't. We're a family, a real family. We've been a real family for months, Rowan pointed out. The law's just catching up. That night, they told the girls together. Clara received the news with quiet relief, the tension she'd been carrying for months finally releasing. Ivy didn't fully understand the legal implications, but she understood that no one was going to make her leave, and that was enough. Does this mean we can stay forever? She asked, climbing into Rowan's lap with the casual trust that still surprised him sometimes. As long as you want, Rowan confirmed. I want forever. Then that's what you get. Later, after the girls were asleep, Rowan found himself back on the porch with Eliza. It had become their ritual, these quiet evenings watching the sun set over land that had become truly theirs. But tonight felt different, heavier, like something needed to be said that they'd both been avoiding. We should probably talk, Eliza said, echoing his thoughts, about what happens now. Now we keep living, keep raising the girls, keep running the ranch. You know what I mean. She twisted his mother's ring on her finger. It still fit loose, but she'd refused to resize it, said she liked the reminder of how it had started. We got married for legal protection. The threat's gone. We could end this arrangement, get a quiet divorce, separate as friends. You'd still have the girls. We could work out custody, visitation. You've done more than anyone could ask. You're free now. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light bleed from the sky. Is that what you want? To leave? I'm asking what you want. I asked you first. Eliza huffed in frustration. Rowan, please, I need to know. If you want out, if this was all just obligation and strategy, it stopped being strategy about 3 months ago, Rowan interrupted. Maybe longer. Hard to pinpoint exactly when. She went very still. What? You heard me. He turned to face her properly. This marriage, this family, it started as convenience, but somewhere along the way, it became real. Became something I didn't know I needed until I had it. I'm saying I don't want a divorce. I don't want you to leave. I don't want any of this to change. The words came easier than he expected. Truth he'd been sitting on for weeks finally surfacing. I'm saying I fell in love with you somewhere between the trial and teaching Ivy to read and watching you fix this broken-down ranch into something that feels like home. Eliza's eyes were bright with tears. You love me?
Yeah. Terrifies me if I'm being honest. Haven't loved anyone in a long time. Forgot how vulnerable it makes you. Rowan reached for her hand. But I'm done pretending this is temporary. Done keeping distance because it's safer. I want this. Want you, want the girls, want the messy, complicated family we've built. If you'll have me. For real this time.
Rowan,
Her voice cracked. I've been in love with you since you stood up to Pemberton that first time. Since you looked at two frightened girls and decided they were worth fighting for. I thought it was just gratitude at first, but it's so much more than that. Then why were you offering me an out? Because I didn't want you to feel trapped. You've sacrificed so much already. I needed you to know you had a choice. I'm choosing you, Rowan said firmly. I'm choosing this. All of it. Eliza laughed through her tears. We're both idiots, you know that? Spent months dancing around this when we could have just talked. Talking's overrated. Oh, really? Then what would you suggest instead? Rowan pulled her close and kissed her properly for the first time since their wedding day. It was nothing like that brief, strategic kiss in front of witnesses. This was real, messy and deep and full of months of pent-up emotion finally finding release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eliza was smiling. That was better than talking, she admitted. Told you.
They sat together on the porch steps, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching the stars emerge one by one. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of challenges. There would be hard days, arguments, struggles they couldn't yet imagine. But they'd face them together, this family that had been forged from desperation and grown into something stronger than any of them expected. The summer brought changes that cemented their new reality. Tom retired, his joints finally giving out after decades of ranch work, and Clara, now 9 and startlingly competent, stepped into helping Rowan manage the cattle with a seriousness that made the other hands shake their heads in amazement. She still had the nightmares occasionally, still carried scars from her early years, but she was growing into someone confident and capable, someone who knew she belonged. Ivy started speaking more freely, losing the frightened silence that had defined her for so long. She chattered constantly now, telling elaborate stories about the barn cat's secret lives and the adventures of her garden vegetables. The trauma hadn't disappeared entirely. Certain things still triggered fear. Storms still made her anxious. But she'd learned she could survive the fear, that it would pass and she'd still be safe. One evening in late July, Rowan was teaching Clara to calculate cattle inventory when Ivy burst into the barn, breathless with excitement. Papa, Papa, come quick! Rowan's hand stilled on the ledger. Papa. She'd been calling him that for a month now, ever since she'd asked if it was okay, and he'd said yes with a throat too tight to say much else. But it still hit him every time, this casual claim of family. What's wrong, Ivy girl? Nothing's wrong. Mama found a letter and she says it's important. He followed Ivy back to the house, Clara trailing behind. Eliza stood in the kitchen holding a formal-looking envelope, her expression unreadable. What is it? Rowan asked. It's from Genevieve's lawyer, not Aldrich. Someone new. Eliza handed him the letter with trembling hands. She's dead, Rowan. Genevieve died 3 weeks ago. Rowan scanned the letter quickly. Pneumonia, sudden and severe. The estate was being settled, and in her revised will, written apparently in the weeks before her death, she'd done something unexpected. She'd forgiven the debt she claimed the girls owed from the trust fund expenses. More than that, she'd released all claims to their inheritance, allowing it to be transferred directly to them under the Mercers' guardianship. It wasn't an apology, exactly. The letter was cold, businesslike, devoid of sentiment. But it was release, freedom from the last threat hanging over them. What does this mean? Clara asked, reading over Rowan's shoulder. It means you and Ivy are officially free, Eliza said. No more legal complications. No one left who can challenge your custody. The trust fund is yours, held until you're 18. I don't care about the money, Clara said immediately. I just want to stay here. You're not going anywhere, Rowan assured her. This just means nobody can ever use it as leverage again. That night, after the initial shock wore off, Rowan found himself thinking about Genevieve. He'd never know what prompted her final gesture, guilt, perhaps, or pragmatism, or just the clarity that comes when facing death. Maybe she'd realized too late what she'd lost in choosing pride and money over connection, or maybe she just wanted to tie up loose ends. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the last shadow had lifted. The girls were truly, legally, permanently theirs. No appeals, no reviews, no threats. Just a family, imperfect and scarred, but whole. The fall brought the harvest, the busiest time on the ranch. Clara worked alongside Rowan in the hands from dawn until dusk, learning the rhythm of hard work and honest exhaustion. Ivy helped Eliza preserve vegetables and fruits, the kitchen filled with the smell of canning and the sound of the younger girl's endless questions. One evening, Rowan came in to find Eliza teaching Ivy to read from an old primer. The little girl struggled with the words, frustration creasing her forehead, but she kept trying. When she finally sounded out a complete sentence, her whoop of joy filled the house. "I did it! Mama, Papa, did you see? I read the whole thing!" "We saw, sweetheart," Eliza said, hugging her. "We're so proud of you." Later, washing dishes while the girls played outside, Eliza leaned against Rowan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if I'd never come here, if you'd sent us away?" "Sometimes, usually when I'm trying to fall asleep and my brain won't shut up. And I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts." Rowan set down the dish he'd been washing. "You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. Purpose, family, a reason to come home that's about more than just routine. You gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. You fought for us when you didn't have to. You chose us." Eliza turned to face him. "I spent so long thinking family was about blood, about who you were born to, but it's not. It's about who shows up, who stays, who fights even when it's hard." "Philosophy in the kitchen. Never thought I'd see the day." She swatted his arm. "I'm being serious. So am I." "You're right, though. Family's not blood. It's choice and commitment and showing up day after day." He pulled her close. "It's you and me and those girls. That's family. Everything else is just details." Winter came early that year, snow blanketing the prairie in white silence. The ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of cold weather routine. Animals to feed, fences to check, fires to maintain. The house became a warm refuge against the bitter wind, filled with the noise of family life. Christmas arrived, their first as an official family. There wasn't much money for gifts after the legal fees and ranch expenses, but they made do. Rowan carved wooden horses for the girls, spending weeks in the barn getting the details right. Eliza sewed new dresses from fabric Mrs. Chen had given them at cost. Clara made elaborate drawings for everyone, her artistic talent emerging now that she had time and safety to explore it. Ivy collected rocks she'd painted with careful designs, offerings of beauty from a child who'd learned the world could be bright as well as dark. They gathered around the tree Tom had helped them cut from the far pasture, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper stars. It wasn't fancy, wouldn't compare to the elaborate celebrations of wealthy families in Boston or even town, but it was theirs. "This is the best Christmas ever," Ivy declared, playing with her wooden horse. "You say that every year," Clara teased gently. "This is our first Christmas together as a real family," Ivy corrected. "That makes it the best." Rowan caught Eliza's eye across the room. She smiled, that soft expression that still made his chest tight with emotions he was still learning to navigate. They'd come so far from that storm-soaked afternoon when she'd stepped off the stagecoach with 2 frightened girls and a desperate prayer. They'd fought battles he never expected, built something from nothing, proved that family could be chosen as well as born. Later, when the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Rowan and Eliza stood at the bedroom window, watching snow fall across the dark prairie. His arm was around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, comfortable in a way they'd earned through months of learning each other's rhythms. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked quietly. "Taking us in? Turning your whole life upside down?" Rowan thought about the question seriously. His life before had been simple, solitary, safe from complications and heartbreak. It had also been empty, a routine that passed for living without actually being alive. These past months had been chaotic, terrifying, full of legal battles and emotional landmines and responsibilities he'd never asked for. They'd also been the best months of his life. "No," he said finally, "not even once. Not even when Ivy had nightmares every night for 2 weeks straight? Not even then. Not even when the legal fees almost bankrupted us? Worth every penny. Not even when I burned dinner 3 times in 1 week because I was distracted worrying about the appeal? Rowan laughed quietly. Well, maybe that week was rough, but overall, no regrets. Eliza tilted her head up to look at him. I love you, Rowan Mercer. I probably don't say it enough. You say it every time you pack my lunch, every time you wait up when I'm working late, every time you make this house feel like home instead of just a building. He kissed her forehead. I love you too. All of you. This whole chaotic, beautiful mess we've made. The months turned into a year, then 2. The girls grew, changed, slowly shed the worst of their trauma while carrying the lessons they'd learned. Clara became Rowan's right hand on the ranch, already talking about the future, about improvements she wanted to make, innovations she'd read about in the farming journals Mrs. Chen saved for her. Ivy bloomed into a bright, curious child whose laughter filled the house and whose art covered every available wall. The ranch prospered despite the financial hit from legal fees. Rowan and Clara's combined efforts improved the herd, and word spread about the quality of their cattle. Other ranchers came asking for advice, for breeding stock, for the expertise that had quietly built while they weren't paying attention. Eliza found her own purpose beyond housekeeping. She started a garden that became the envy of the county, selling surplus vegetables in town. She took in sewing from neighbors, her skill with a needle becoming another income stream. She became known in her own right, not just as Rowan's wife, but as a woman of competence and character. And slowly, carefully, the marriage that had started as strategy became a partnership built on respect, affection, and hard-won trust. They had their arguments. Neither was perfect. Both carried scars that sometimes made communication harder than it should be. But they learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to forgive each other's mistakes. 3 years after the trial, on a spring morning that smelled like rain and new grass, Rowan stood in the same spot where he'd first seen Eliza step off the stagecoach. The girls were out riding with Tom's replacement, a young hand who treated Clara like the boss she was becoming. Eliza was beside him, her hand in his, no longer wearing a ring that fit loose, but one he'd bought her last year, sized properly, worn with pride. Do you remember that first day? She asked. When I showed up with the girls and you looked like you wanted to shoot us all? I remember thinking you were the worst kind of trouble. You were right. Best trouble I ever invited in, though. Rowan squeezed her hand. Changed everything. For the better? What do you think? Eliza looked around at the ranch they'd built together, not just the physical structures, but the life they'd created, the family they'd forged from desperation and determination. Yeah, for the better. In the end, that's what it came down to. Not the legal battles won or the money saved or the obstacles overcome. Just the simple truth that they'd found each other when they both needed finding, built something real from the ruins of their separate pasts, proved that family was less about blood and more about showing up every day and choosing love even when it was hard. The girls came riding back over the hill, Clara in the lead and Ivy right behind her, both laughing at something only they understood. They'd grown so much from the frightened children who'd arrived 3 years ago. They still carried scars, would always carry them, but they'd learned they were stronger than their trauma, that safety and love could overcome almost anything. Mama, Papa, Ivy called, waving enthusiastically. Clara says I'm getting good enough to help with the roundup next month. We'll see about that, Rowan called back, but he was smiling. She is getting better, Clara said seriously as they approached. Her seat's improved, and Copper listens to her now. Then maybe she can help, Rowan conceded. But you're responsible for her. Always am, Clara said with the casual certainty of someone who'd been protecting her sister long before it was fair to ask that of a child. As the girls dismounted and ran toward the house, arguing about something inconsequential but important to them, Eliza turned to Rowan. We did all right, didn't we? Despite everything? Better than all right, Rowan said. We did good. And standing there in the morning sun with his wife beside him and his daughters disappearing into the house they'd made a home, Rowan Mercer finally understood what he'd been missing all those years he'd chosen isolation over connection. He understood that walls kept out pain, but they also kept out joy. That safety wasn't found in solitude, but in the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos of people who loved you despite your flaws. He understood that family wasn't something you were born into, but something you built, day by day, choice by choice, through the hard work of showing up and staying even when it was easier to leave. And he understood, finally, that the lonely man who'd wanted nothing more than silence and routine had been wrong about what he needed. What he'd needed was exactly what he'd found: a reason to come home, people worth fighting for, a life that meant something beyond mere survival. The storm-battered stranger who'd stepped onto his land 3 years ago hadn't destroyed his world. She'd saved it. Saved him. Given him purpose and family and love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. And that, more than any victory in court or triumph over adversity, was the real miracle. Not that they'd won the legal battle, but that they'd won each other. Not that they'd built a family despite the odds, but that they'd chosen to keep building it every single day. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic revelations. This one ended quietly, in the ordinary moments that make up a life. Breakfast needing to be made, chores needing to be done, children needing to be raised, love needing to be practiced day after ordinary day. And somehow, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.